Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's development control meeting. Sorry about the lack of visibility, but I think we can all put up with that. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if a fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. Fire exit is located where you came in, and we will meet in the War Memorial Park. This meeting is being webcast live on the internet. The webcast will also be published on YouTube after the meeting, and can all members of the public and officers and members please turn their phones either off or onto silent. Thank you. For the benefit of members of the public watching or participating in this meeting, I would like to explain who everyone is. My name is Councillor Nick Robinson, and I am chairman of this committee. To my right and left are councillors who will be making the decisions on the applications of this evening's agenda. To my immediate right and left are officers who will be presenting the applications and providing advice to the committee. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee, not a political meeting. The committee will be considering the published papers, examining the evidence brought before us tonight, and will make decisions based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. At the appropriate time, I will invite speakers to contribute to the meeting in the order set out on the update paper. May I ask that all speakers, including visiting members, speak clearly and keep to the points made to the application on material reasons only. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. May I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and keep any comments on each planning item to a maximum of 4 minutes. This evening, I think there are 5 on the agenda, so hopefully we should be well under 3 hours tonight. I understand that planning can be emotive and ask that everyone remains polite and professional through this evening's meeting. Face masks are not mandatory, but I would prefer it if people wore them when they're moving around the building or around the room. But please, if you could take them off when you're speaking, I think that would help everybody and make everybody feel slightly more comfortable. Thank you. Apologies for absence and substitutions. I have apologies from Councillor Godison, and I have Councillor Mahaffey replacing Councillor Leeks. Are there any others? I can't see any. No? Good. Thank you. Declarations of interest? No? No hands up? Good. Urgent matters? I have none, or do you want to read out that? Mike has something on the NPPF.
Thank you, Chair. This is just to inform members, as set out at the beginning of the update paper, that the NPPF was actually amended yesterday, 20th July. I'm not intending to provide a full briefing on those changes, but to give members a flavour. There's a greater emphasis on designing beautiful, following the government's approach to that, both at plan making and decision making stage. Some changes to Article 4 directions and the fact that they should be at the smallest geographical location, as well as changes to heritage with regards to approach to changes to any statues. As I say, it's not intended to be a full briefing, it's just to give members a quick flavour of what's being changed. The key issue for tonight's agenda, as set out at the beginning of the update paper, is that nothing within that fundamentally changes any of the reports or assessments before you. But in any decisions issued from this committee, any of the conditions, informatives and, where relevant, reasons for refusal would now reference the new NPPF.
Thank you, Mike. Minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of July. Is everybody happy with them? Yeah, do I have a proposer? Councillor Harvey, and a seconder, Councillor Ganesh.
Sorry, Chair.
My apologies, they are to be dealt with at the next meeting. I should read what's in front of me, really, shouldn't I? Okay, do you want to deal with this nitrate mitigation report now? No, that's the end, that's it. Right, item 1, or application number 1, which is Hoddington Arms, Upton Gray. We have, could we have Jeffrey Yowett and Christine Pratt to the speakers table? How you wish to separate yourselves or not separate yourselves? That is.
I'm speaking on behalf of my husband, Jeffrey. I can't.
Okay, please take a seat, and if you wait whilst the officer introduces the application. Thank you. Nicola.
The application item is on page 17 of your agenda, concerning the single-storey detached annex for the public house to provide 5 guest rooms and a parking layout for 27 parking spaces, which includes disabled spaces and the removal of 1 tree. To note on the update, the agent has agreed to 3 pre-commencement conditions that are obviously within your agenda. There's also, since publication of the report, neighbour letters, 2 neighbour letters have been received concerning the ownership of the land issues, inconsistencies in drawings, and that a potential meeting.
Sorry, Nicola, could you pull your microphone a bit closer? I'm getting messages from the back that they can't hear.
Sorry. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Yes. So on the update, it refers to the 3 pre-commencement conditions that have been agreed by the agent. Reference to 2 neighbour letters that have been received concerning land ownership, boundary issues, inconsistencies with drawings showing the correct red lines, and that a meeting is intended to take place between surveyors representing both sides, so that an up-to-date plan could be submitted to the land registry. The agent has submitted a letter about saying that there's no conclusion being reached about when this meeting will take place. An amended tree protection plan has been submitted, which helps with showing a consistent red line between all the plans, and also a rejection has been received from Councillor Raffel. There's nothing else to add, and the recommendation is still for approval of the application, subject to the conditions within the report.
Thank you, Nicola. The Speaker, you have 4 minutes, and I will give you warning when you have 1 minute left. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Frances Yurt, and my husband and I have lived in the Old Post House next to the Hoddington Arms since 2008. Both buildings are Grade 2 listed and within the conservation area of Upton Gray. I absolutely understand that the pub is an important asset to the village and a business that needs to make a profit, but we strongly think that this proposal is inappropriate. I'm unsure if you have visited the site individually, but it does need some description. The proposed annex is to be built on the paddock at the back of the present car park, which is commonly used for overflow car parking, often accommodating about 20 or more cars at peak times. The main tarmac car park is inadequate for present needs. The grassy field is the soakaway for both the neighbouring 5-house development, South Hill, and for the pub. There are no mains drains in this area of Upton Gray. The paddock forms the corner of the conservation area. Building on this land would obviously decrease, not increase, the available number of car parking spaces. And we have a great worry that cars would be left around the village, which is narrow country roads with a lot of busy traffic and large lorries, school buses, etc., needing access. Also, the setting would urbanise the rural area, and our neighbours would suffer from more increased noise and light pollution because the people who presumably staying in these houses will be coming and going late at night. There's an outstanding, as you've heard, there is an outstanding boundary dispute with the owner of the property to the rear of the field of some 3 metres, which is, I understand, very significant to the siting of the new building and how many car spaces would be there'd be room for. The pub owner has put in 2 applications to build a house at the other side of the pub garden called Lease Hill Development. This didn't come up in your report, but I think it's important. The other side of the pub garden was originally an orchard and at the end of our old post house garden. These applications were both refused, most recently in 2018. It was then that this application came in to build an annex at the far end of the paddock. The revised application by the pub was submitted in July
You have 1 minute left between you.
2019, but the supporters only submitted their views in the space of 3 days the following March, and I have to say at least 6 of the supporters either work or have a financial interest in the pub. The need for this accommodation has changed over the past 18 months with the rise of Airbnb and people working from home. I urge you to reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions to the speakers? I have none. Thank you very much. If you could just wipe the edge of the table where you've touched it with your hands, the wipes are in front of you, and the buttons on the microphone, and then return to your normal seats. Thank you. We could have the next speakers, which is John Barnes and Anita Gaffney. Thank you. You have 4 minutes between you. I will warn you when you have 1 minute left. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your time. I'm John Barnes. I run the business of Hoddington Arms. We started off years ago, 10 years ago, in Old Basing with the Crown, and with an extremely good crew there who took the pub up into the top 50 in the Good Food Guide. And we then bought the pub 6 years ago from 4 businessmen who had spent a lot of money doing it up and renovating it. We have 2 areas really I believe I need to cover now with Anita, which are our desire for the letting rooms and the actual purpose behind doing it. And this is quite critical from our point of view. Running a pub, particularly over the last 2 years, has been a very interesting experience. And it's protecting the profitability and the jobs of the people that work there. That's the first area that I'd like to touch on. The second area is that obviously because of this, there's been a lot of opposition from a relatively small group within the village. We've had a lot of support and a lot of supporters, but nobody on the whole wants to put their hand up and go in writing, and I fully understand that. And we didn't pressurise anybody into actually putting in a supporting letter for us. We've gone into massive detail, as you will see, I think, from all the briefing documents, in terms of taking every issue that's been raised, taking it extremely seriously, and making sure that we can adequately answer that. And that includes, and I'll just go on to those in a second, but what was important from our point of view was that we did, and we took full notice of the whole of the local community. And therefore, everything has been covered from our point of view through lighting, where we've agreed and would be very happy with what I call low level lighting, so it's sort of about a metre or so that it isn't actually offensive in terms of people who are looking towards the pub. I just put something right there, which is that the Hoddington Arms is on main drains. It is not using a cesspit. So yes, we are on main drains there, which I think was not totally understood. If I take the car park and its use, the car park, which we call the paddock because that's basically what it is absolutely fine for 7 or 8 months of the year. But as soon as it rains, driving cars over it just turns it into a quagmire. It doesn't flood, but it gets extremely messy. And therefore that part of the car park is actually shut off for 4 or 5 months of the year. In terms of the other things that the pub has done, we do a number of things community-wise. One is we allow the school bus to pull in and unload safely, and mums, dads, etc., to actually use the car park so that the children are protected. We will continue to do that. We're going to withdraw that. Secondly, we make the pub car park open to the numerous walking groups that like to walk in Upton Gray.
You have 1 minute left.
Thank you. And therefore, we actually take cars out of the village in quite large quantities by actually allowing them to use the car park. And we don't generally make it a prerequisite that they actually use the pub. We allow them just to use it for walking. The boundary dispute is unfortunate. It was brought to my notice in January 2020. The person who raised it then immediately, rather than giving me any detail, went legal on it. And unfortunately, that has now gone on since January 2020. And I believe it's being used and just delayed now to try and stop this planning application. Really, from my point of view, that's I hope covered the main points in why we're doing it. The key area is obviously the business plan. It would employ another 2 full-time members of staff and potentially half a person on a part-time basis. And I'd like to feel that we've really answered all the questions that have been asked of us in terms of what we're doing, and spent in excess of £20,000 on professional advice to make sure that we answered both the planning officer and the other comments that have been made fully adequately. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Questions to the speaker, Councillor Mahaffey, followed by Councillor Tomlin.
Do I need to turn it on?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Barnes, thank you very much indeed for that presentation. It's very helpful for us. I've got to say, I've had supper in Hoddington Arms, and I think it's an absolutely fantastic pub. I'm very impressed, and you should be congratulated for what you provide as a service. But in some ways, that's part of the problem, because I see the thing that jumped off the paper from the documents I've got in front of me is this question of parking. Now, I know you've got a good sort of local contingent of locals that use the pub as well, but I would classify you also as a sort of a venue pub. Certainly, you know, when I've been there, I drive from quite a long way away because it's a super evening out, and you know we gather friends over there and people come.
Councillor Mahaffey, could you ask your question? It's questions, not discussion at the moment. Thank you.
The question is, you're going to say to us that 27 car parking spaces is adequate, and the people who are objecting to it are going to say it's not adequate and it's going to spill out into the road. And it's not clear in my mind how we as members of this committee actually sort of figure out who's right.
There are only 3 days really in which the car park is basically coming close to fully utilised. That they would be Friday, Saturday and Sunday. You can take out the weekend, sorry, you can take out the midday lunches, and you can take out most of the midday traffic. Currently we're shut on a Monday and Tuesday, and at the moment I have no belief that we will actually start reopening again on Monday and Tuesday for all the reasons in terms of staffing, etc. So add that to the winter, add that to the cars we take off, and I believe, yes, I'm sure there will be some cars at some stage that park on the road, but I would say I believe we are a net benefit parking to the village. in terms of allowing the walkers to park, the school bus to unload safely, and therefore the 27 is adequate, I would say, in more than, or 26, 28, depending how you squeeze them in more than 80–90% of the time period. The time period when it's not would tend to be from probably 8 o'clock on a Saturday evening and 8 o'clock on a Friday evening, when they are the busy periods. So in genuine, that's the way it is. That's how we view it. We would like to feel that it would stand on the odd occasion that it happens for what would be a 2–3 hour time period 2 or 3 times a week. That is not an unnecessary burden, is our view.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mr. Barnes. Thank you for that. I've got 2 distinct, very simple questions. With the detail of the building you're proposing, the windows to the rear, are they seen as emergency exits for the bedrooms, like another way out, or are they actually going to be windows that can't open? And the purpose of that is about controlling noise to the back of the houses that back onto you. So that was the first question.
Sorry, my understanding is, obviously from a Windows point of view, I do not know the answer to that question, bluntly. I would need to check with the architect. What I would say, though, is that the architect has worked very closely with us and very closely with the planning office, and the configuration of the building and the way it's been done, which has been through a number of iterations, well, more than a number of iterations, a massive number of iterations, is trying to answer all of those points, but I don't categorically know the answer to that.
Thank you. Councillor Frost.
Sorry, Chair, it's my second one,
Oh,
if I may. The other one was in the presentation earlier from the objections. It mentioned that this building will be located on the main soakaway for the group of houses at the back. Is that, to your knowledge, true, or can you make comment on that?
The drainage field, we employed, again, professional advice on this. The professional advice said that we were far enough away from that drainage field. The actual paddock itself was a drainage field for us on the cesspit. That is no longer true. And we have the option, should we be successful in this application and build, to actually reuse the cesspit that's there to make sure that there's no further burden on any drainage system. We also have an enormous area which can either use it for that or we can actually use it for a soakaway. But touch wood, through some of the worst weather we've seen over the last 2 years, we don't have a flooding problem.
thank you. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I think we have a visibility problem because I have been indicating for quite a while that I wanted to speak, okay, actually before Councillor Mahaffey, okay, and so I'm a bit disappointed that I'm coming in last. However, can we have the boundary site plan up, please? That one, not that one, that one, okay. Could you please just indicate to me where the boundary dispute of potentially up to 3 metres is, okay, if you can indicate where on that site plan, and how will this affect the car parking if the boundary is set at 3 metres, and how do you plan to keep, you know, the 27 car parking spaces? Can you?
The car park, yeah, that's where the boundary is. If you see at the back of, I mean, where you can see the yellow bits, that's currently the paddock, yeah, and then the building itself. My understanding, and from the professional advice we've received, is that that boundary dispute, which may move, if it's genuine and works, may move the boundary 1 to 2 metres, but only on the right-hand end of it. We have engaged with the owner of that property. I am banned from talking to him directly. His lawyer has told me everything has to go through him. And we just put forward a proposal to actually sort it. But it is being delayed and delayed. I mean, it was first mentioned to me in the car park in January 2020. A very strong solicitor's letter, February 2020, followed then by them saying that because of COVID, they didn't feel that they should proceed with it, which was exactly the time the planning application was going in. So, from our point of view, we've taken every step possible in conjunction with the planning office to try and make sure that that boundary, whether it be where it currently is and where the householder's fence was built, or whether or not it actually comes a metre and a bit through into what is a line of very tatty conifers. Does that answer the question adequately? Sorry.
It has no effect on parking.
Oh, sorry, it has no effect on parking either. So it doesn't change the number of car park spaces.
Thank you. I can't see any more hands, but as Councillor Frost pointed out, my sight line is somewhat restricted. So are there any more questions? No? Thank you very much. If you could just wipe down the front edge of the desks, the arms of the chairs and the buttons on the mic, that would be much appreciated. And if we could have Councillor Raffel, please. You have 4 minutes, and I will warn you when you have 1 minute left.
Allowing me to address the meeting. There is clearly a premature issue regarding the outstanding boundary dispute, but that's a matter for you to look into and for you to determine. I have 4 other brief points to make. I've looked at what appears to be a business plan online. Unless I've missed it, or there is a second one, it's no such thing. It doesn't talk about the need in terms of what it would generate from letting this premises, and nor does it make the economic case for it with projected income. It's all just aspiration. The applicants have been correctly described by Councillor Mahaffey as very successful. It's a very successfully run business. It's great atmosphere in the pub. The food and drink is wonderful, and it's well loved by residents, whether they oppose this application or support it. But I engaged with them, and they engaged with me after the original withdrawn application. And I made it clear to them that I didn't want anything to be built that would be turned into a separate dwelling. And I said I would support the building of something near to the pub where the sheds are at the moment that could be used for function rooms. And with a little bit, maybe 1 or 2 rooms of accommodation above. And I indicated, of course, if you just consider 25 people, 4 sittings a week, that could increase their turnover by £5,000 a week or £250,000 a year. So that's the business case in my submission, not some letting at £100 a night, 1 or 2 or 3 rooms, 1 or 2 or 3 nights a week at the end of the garden. And of course that proposal that I put to them wouldn't have resulted in any loss of parking. In any event, they have decided to continue with squeezing this at the other end of the car park and putting it next to the site where previously they'd applied for planning permission for whatever reason. So that leaves the 2 major reasons for objection, the first of which I suggest is the issue of parking. And it is a major concern because it's been rightly calculated by the Parish Council that there would be a loss of 13 car parking space net loss if this was successful. And that would result in substantial amount of parking on the road. And as the applicant has conceded, that must be at least 3 times a week. Their business has grown, I have to say, because of course now they've got a marquee outside the back because of course they weren't able to use the inside, and it's very well supported. And I would indicate that I can see more and more people wanting to use the HOD going forward. So the pressure on the car park is significant at peak times. The final reason for objection is the grass area. It is waterlogged when it rains heavily. I know that because I've seen it squelched up with cars that aren't four-wheel drives getting stuck in
You
it.
have 1 minute.
The applicants have not answered what is in your report at page 25 when it says Noverta did not review the impact of building on the South Hill residence soakaway in the paddock, because that is the soakaway, and that's one of the reasons probably why it gets waterlogged. So there is a major issue of surface water runoff with the car parking proposal at the moment, with firming up the surface in the paddock. And of course, the residents of Upton Gray are only too familiar with flooding. Further down the road, when the Buckskin incident happened in Basingstoke, they had sewage floating past their houses in Upton Gray at the same time. So it's a very sensitive issue and one that needs to be addressed properly by the applicant, and I don't suggest it has been. So I'd ask you to oppose this application.
Thank you. Questions to Councillor Raffel? No? Thank you, Councillor Raffel. If you could have a quick wipe down before you leave, that would be much appreciated by the next speaker. Questions to officers? Councillor Hussey.
I know the ruling is one question, but I do have two about relevance and whether the points I raise are planning considerations or not. And I'd like the officer's view on it, please. Is the land boundary dispute relevant to the consideration of this planning application before us this evening? And secondly, is the pub required to make an economic case for the economic viability of this application? Is that a relevant planning consideration? Thank you.
So, Councillor, in terms of your first question about the land boundary dispute, obviously boundary disputes do happen, unfortunately, but they are civil matters.
Nicola, could you pull your microphone a lot closer, please? Thank you. And bring it down. That's great. Thank you.
Hello. Right, so, sorry, in terms of Councillor Hussey's first question and the land boundary dispute, obviously, such matters do happen, unfortunately, but they are civil matters. But in terms of the red line and the land registry documents that have been submitted in support of the application, it is in land that the applicant controls and owns, so we are satisfied with that. And in terms of the economic case, and in terms of the policies that we've got in the local plan, given that it's a tourist facility and an essential service, there's nothing in there that says they have to provide an economic case. It's just that, but obviously they have submitted the business plan to support the application, but it's not a prerequisite that it has to be done and submitted.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hussey, I will allow one more.
It's a clarification on the first answer. Whether there's the boundary dispute, whether it goes A or B, is that relevant? I mean, it doesn't matter that they provided information. I didn't think it was a planning consideration, land ownership.
That's correct. Perhaps I should have worded it a bit better, yes.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to talk about noise, and because in the report it was saying that the heating for this extra building or bedrooms was to be done by a heat pump, okay, which is going to be running 24/7, and I'm just trying to understand what sort of level of noise would be there and how that would affect neighbours.
The environmental health officer hasn't raised any issues with that, and we've got a condition to control the submission of those details, which is at condition 19 on page 49. So given the current layout and where the positioning of the building is and the boundary treatment, no noise issues have been raised and to warrant refusal of the application on those grounds. So we're satisfied with the positioning of the building, the internal layout of the building, and the use of said heat pump, subject to the control of the details via the condition.
Councillor Mahaffey.
Thank you, Chair. I realise I should have answered this question of Mr Barnes earlier, but going back to this issue of parking, has any consideration been given to the employees' parking? Do we know what the number is, given that Mr Barnes has just said that there will be an additional 2 people employed?
Sorry, if you refer to page 33 of the agenda, there's under the heading of parking, it goes through the justification for the number of spaces, which includes existing provision given staff and floor area of the pub, and then what's required for the 5 bedrooms as part of this application. So there's a breakdown there. So saying that there's 18 spaces for the existing pub, there's 5 spaces required for the proposed five bedrooms within the building. That there's 7 full-time staff and 12 part-time staff currently, and given our parking standards, which is based on it looks on per square meterage of dining and eating floor space together with number of bedrooms and things like that. So adding it all together, there's a total of 25 spaces would be required. But obviously, given the layout, we have 27, so there's a net gain, and that does include disabled spaces as well. And obviously, the new area would be resurfaced impermeable paving, and then you've got the nine spaces within the new layout would be to the front of the building. So, and then given that together with the fact that the Hampshire County Council raised no issue with the proposal, there's no concerns on parking grounds or highway grounds.
Councillor Gaskell, I think it was. I saw a hand down there.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, it was my hand. I'm still concerned about the flooding. So I know this area quite well, and I've witnessed it flooded in several areas. There's 3 sort of routes which come down, and this is the point where it all gets together. There's also been a couple of developments up there, and Councillor Raffel has already stated that there's been issues there. Are you aware of any major works with regard to the sewerage systems or anything in the last couple of years which would sort of mitigate that?
No, I'm not.
So it's still an issue?
The only issue is obviously that the members of the public are raising it, but I'm not sure there's an issue that we as an authority are looking at.
Councillor Court.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just go back to the page 25, and it's Parish Council there has actually requested a flood risk assessment under EM7, and under conditions you've suggested, I think section 6, page 45, prior to commencement of development hereby approve full details of proposals for foul and surface water drainage. Is that meant to cover the Parish Council's request? Thank you.
Yes, it is.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. I can't see any more hands, but I have 2 questions. Firstly, taking the whole scheme into account with the permeable paving that's being included, do you feel that the natural runoff rate will be greater than it was or less than it was? Are we getting a net gain or a net loss in that on the natural runoff rate?
Well, obviously, I'm not an expert, and obviously, given the fact that a flood risk assessment hasn't been submitted, but given the fact that the whole area will be permeably treated surface-wise, so and the elevated nature, so the land would slopes down to the road. Given the impervious nature of the treatment of the surface, I would say it would be improved.
Thank you. And the second question is, there was a question asked of the applicant about the windows. Were they proper windows? Were they openable, controlled windows? Do we have any more information on that?
I'm not aware of any details or information regarding that, but obviously in terms of the internal layout of the building, they are bedrooms, so it's a habitable room. So I don't know if there's a building regulation, health and safety issue about having windows and ventilation in a bedroom. So that's the most logical explanation I could explain for the layout.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Can I ask, on the current layout of the car park, is it delineated with white lines and clearly marked out?
I think it is in part, but with the rear so you've got the front half of the site. I just think it's very faint, isn't it? I can't see any defined spaces, and obviously the rear of the site where the building is, that's obviously not defined either. So there would be, perhaps a haphazard arrangement.
And we don't actually have a parking specific survey associated with the application, do we?
No, we don't.
Thank you. Any more questions? No? Okay, debate. Councillor Harvey.
Well, just on that point, my thoughts are around the parking issue, and if the car park is not delineated and not set out now, the parish council's argument is that there are on occasion over 35 vehicles that use that car park. We don't have a parking survey to clarify that one way or the other, so we have the parish council being clear in its mind, making the case that on occasion there are that many cars in that car park. We then have a proposal for a delineated car park that would accommodate 27 vehicles. Therefore, the parish council's argument that there will be vehicles forced out onto the road is logically made. Now, if we don't have the evidence to take it the other way, because it hasn't been presented with a parking survey, we have no indication that that is not the case, then there is a concern that we would be creating on-street car parking and forcing vehicles at the maximum rate, as suggested by the applicant, onto the local road. What we don't have in here is an accurate statement from the highways officers of that context, that particular setting, that says that that would be considered safe. They say that the parking they consider by our standards make it safe. So in that sense, there's a piece of missing evidence really in my head at the moment, just on that particular point of parking. And that would concern me. I would not want to push parking onto a local rural village road to that extent, given those circumstances. So I have an open mind at the moment as to what I'm thinking through with the evidence that's been presented on the application, but I am concerned about what I'm seeing and reading.
Councillor Mahaffey.
Thank you, Chair. I think I just want to support what Councillor Harvey said there, because this was my question right at the start. I can only speak anecdotally that I know on the weekends Hoddington Arms gets very busy because it's very good. And it goes back to my original question, that is, I've got no evidence to say whether or not this parking scheme is going to work or whether or not it's going to push cars onto the road. And clearly, if it does push cars onto the road, I would be very concerned about that.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I hear what our two councillors have said, but it's a difficult one. We have a parking standard, so we've applied that, and this proposal meets that standard. If the pub has a particularly busy night, then it's going to be a random event of how many cars actually can get into the car park. Yes, it's reducing them, but it's reducing what it had to still maintain our standard. So that either challenges our standard, and that parking on the road, whilst it's not seen by the highways as an issue, there's no double yellow lines. It's a difficult one. There are bound to be situations where it will always be on the road. So I don't know. It meets standards. We've seen so many applications through this committee where it's met standards just, and we passed them. We've argued many a time that it will impact on road parking, but we meet the standard. So, you know, if we like, are we tied by our own rules? In the sense, that's what rules are for. So it's a difficult one, I think, to do that. Sorry. So thank you. I'll just make that comment.
Councillor Hussey.
I want to talk about parking as well. I agree with Councillor Tomlin that I've been in many debates with strong disagreements between different councillors on this committee about parking, and we've been ruled by our parking standards always. Now, we haven't got a detailed parking survey, and I don't wish to appear rude, but we've got anecdotal evidence from the parish council and the people who object. I'm not saying they are right or wrong, but we haven't got any information which our officers can check in front of us to see this evening. When we get differences, we rely on the experts, but we haven't got differences other than anecdotal. We haven't got firm evidence or disagreeing evidence. We've just got people's opinions. That makes it incredibly difficult. And I would look for anybody else in this debate, people who have been to the Hoddington Arms. I've only been on a couple of occasions, and admittedly I've been during the day, and there's never been any parking problems. So I haven't got any first-hand experience myself. So I'd look to other members of the committee who can speak with their own authority on what they themselves have seen. Or perhaps, with the chairman's permission, that perhaps an officer could sum up at some stage on parking.
Certainly. So one more question from Councillor Frost first.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say I'm rather perplexed by the parking issue because this application does meet standards. However, I think I'm thinking that there needs to be a traffic survey done, okay, on the parking, and I'm just wondering what are our options for deferring this application, okay, while that piece of work is done, and then bringing it back to committee. So at least that way, the committee is then assured that we have some concrete evidence regarding the parking.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Jed. Shall I take Councillor Frost's question first on the option, and then if I can come back to Councillor Hussey's request for some summary of the parking issues. So on the point that Councillor Frost raised, it's always before the committee to defer if you have good grounds to seek very specific additional information. So in this case, obviously, parking survey, I guess, to establish the precise amount and I think importantly location of any off-site parking that occurs. I don't think, though, from what's been said this evening, there's actually any dispute. My understanding of what the applicant was saying was that there is some occasions where there's overspill onto the road. So I don't think that part in itself is in dispute. I think, though, moving on to the point Councillor Hussey has asked for clarification on in terms of parking as a whole, it does meet parking standards. So in terms of the committee's decision making, it is to decide the application in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Your own adopted parking SPD sets out the totality of parking requirement for the site, and what the report is confirming is that parking standard is met. And I think there's two additional points that I would draw members' attention to. One is, as set out in the report, the existing position in terms of parking is to a degree informal. There's spaces available, and you've seen the photos not having laid out parking spaces. And actually, I think the report sets out that none of the previous permissions have actually required specific parking to be provided. So there is effectively no control over that in planning terms at the moment. Whereas what is being proposed in this application is that actually those 9 additional spaces would be marked out and retained for those purposes in future. The other is, and I think, again, picking up on something which I believe is common between all speakers this evening, is that at times the area where the building is to be does get saturated, not to a point that causes the planning authority any concerns in terms of flooding, but certainly it would appear that there's periods of the year when it can't be used for parking. So in essence, the parking standard is met, in terms of what we've set out in the report, and in addition, it actually provides it in a more sustainable way moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Has anybody else got any more on debate? Councillor Frost, followed by Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened very carefully to what every person has said here, and especially Mike with the parking compliance. And I have to say, whilst I did say, what are the options of deferring it, I don't think it's necessarily the case, because the only bit that we've kind of want to try and establish is how much overspill parking is there going to be at any one particular time, if I understand you correctly, Mike. And so therefore, if it meets our standard, I have to say that I'm minded. Oh gosh, it's a difficult one, but I am minded to come down on approval for the application, and I'm happy to put the motion forward to the committee after hearing Councillor Howard Sorrell's question.
Thank you for that. Councillor Howard Sorrell.
I was just going to say that based on everything we've heard, the only possible concern that we have that would mind us to refuse the application would be an overabundance of caution that our own standards that we've set for ourselves aren't good enough, which to me seems slightly odd. So I would agree with Councillor Frost that we have to approve the application as it is currently set out.
Okay. Are you therefore seconding it, the motion?
If Councillor Frost was a formal proposal, then I will happily formally second. Yeah.
Councillor Frost?
I'll happily formally propose the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Mahaffey.
Thank you, Chair. Very, very brief comment. I hear everything everyone's saying. We do have standards. The problem is the world isn't standard. We're trying to apply the same standards to not very popular pubs as we are to popular pubs. And I think there is a requirement for a bit of realism somewhere.
Thank you. It has been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour of approval? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and me. And those against? 2. Yeah, that application is approved. Officers, to sum up.
The application is has been recommended, has been granted, subject to the conditions on the order paper.
Thank you. Item number 2, land at the rear of Bishop's Green Cottage, Etchingswell. Could we have Oliver Spencer to the speakers table, please? All right, okay. Well, just wait a minute for Mr. Spencer to arrive in the room. Mr. Spencer, if you could take a seat at the speakers table. And if you just wait there whilst the officer introduces the item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. As indicated, this application is for land to the rear of Bishop's Green Cottage, Etchingswell Road, Bishop's Green. This is an outline application which is seeking planning permission for the erection of 4 dwellings with access from Etchingswell Road, together with landscaping and associated development. And this is following the demolition and removal of an existing stable building and riding arena. All matters for the application are reserved, and therefore the only issue being considered this evening is the principle of development. Therefore, the layout provided within your agenda on page 86 is for illustrative purposes only. If I draw members' attention to the update paper, this sets out for members' attention that the comments from our Environmental Health Officer have actually been corrected to be aligned with this particular application. As a consequence of the corrected information, there is an amendment to conditions 17 and 18 within your agenda, which are set out in the update paper. And there's also an additional condition for your information. And these pre-commencement conditions have been agreed by the agent. I've got nothing further to add other than advising that this application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions listed in the agenda and the update paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Mr. Spencer, you have 4 minutes. I will warn you when you have 1 minute left, and the microphone button is on the right-hand side of your machine. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. I'm Olivier Spencer from Andrew Martin Planning, and I'm here to represent the applicant, Mr. Simon Schiff, in relation to the land rear of Bishop's Green Cottage. The application site currently includes disused stables, a horse exerciser, riding arena and paddock. The proposed development involves the demolition and removal of these buildings and the construction of 4 family-sized homes with large gardens and new landscape planting. Although located in the countryside in planning policy terms, the application site comprises previously developed land and is situated in a sustainable location. It is within easy walking distance of the convenience store and preschool to the south and the Green and Business Park to the north. The site is also well served by existing buses which provide connections to local schools, services, recreation facilities and railway stations. The proposal is therefore consistent with the presumption in favour of sustainable development in the National Planning Policy Framework, which is triggered by the borough's lack of a 5-year housing land supply. The application is being made in outline, leaving detailed design to the subsequent reserved matters stage. However, an illustrative master plan was submitted with the application, that is on the screen now, and serves to demonstrate how 4 new homes could be accommodated on site. This has been informed by a suite of supporting reports covering transport, arboriculture, landscape, drainage and ecology. As some objectors have noted, there's been 2 accidents on Itchinswell Road in the last 15 years, both involving lone vehicles and both due to very poor driving. However, the applicant's highway engineer has conducted formal speed surveys on this road, and these have been used to inform the design of the planned visibility splays. The result is that the existing fence on this side of the road will be moved back onto the applicant's other land, thereby increasing visibility and ensuring that the new access is safe. In terms of arboriculture, the new homes have been planned around the highest quality trees, so that no mature trees, including those with TPOs, are lost or harmed by the proposals. New planting and landscaping is also planned across the site to soften the appearance of the new homes and help to minimise any visual impact on the surrounding landscape. For ecology, a variety of habitat creation and enhancement works will result in a biodiversity net gain of over 10%, consistent with the Environment Bill, which is working its way through Parliament. With regard to flooding, the application site is located outside of the flood zone and has never flooded. Furthermore, the planned use of an attenuation tank below the vehicle turning area on site will help to collect surface water before slowly discharging it to the existing watercourse. Finally, the Borough Council's Planning, Environmental Health and Biodiversity Officers and the County Council's Highway Officer have seen fit to recommend the scheme for approval. With that in mind, I respectfully request that members follow this advice and grant outline consent. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions to the speaker? I see no hands, so I'll ask my question. You have an attenuation tank. Has that been set, is that been constructed with a hydro valve on it to release water at less than the natural runoff rate?
Well, the proposals are an outline at the moment, so the detailed design of the tank and the associated infrastructure haven't been drawn up. However, the strategy behind it is very much to ensure that surface water is drained from that tank at greenfield runoff rates, plus an additional allowance for climate change and urban creep as well. So I think the answer to your question is yes.
Thank you. Any other questions to the speaker? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for coming in. Obviously, I note that it is an outline planning permission. I just want to see the fancy pictures that are up here for the 4 houses. Okay, how accurate are they?
Well, what we've done is we've designed a scheme based on the supporting information and constraints, etc., that we studied through the various reports. So that scheme is deliverable, absolutely. However, I can't guarantee that precisely that scheme will be delivered, because obviously we would, subject to being granted outline consent, we would need to make a reserve matters application. That application would be discussed with officers, and it may be that officers and other consultees want certain changes to layout and design, etc. So from our point of view, it's deliverable, but it's not a final design.
Sorry, Chair, thank you. I understand that, which is why you're going for outline planning permission. But obviously, you said that that the housing or the infrastructure had already been planned. Okay, and I was just wanting to know just how accurate that illustrative plan is. Okay, and you've answered that question. Thank you.
Yeah, it is an accurate plan. It's a scale plan. It's based on all the supporting technical information. So I'm confident it's as accurate a plan as you can really get at the outline stage.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you very much. No more questions. If you could just, before you leave the table, if you could just wipe the front edge of the table, the microphone buttons and the arms of your chair down, that would be helpful for the next speaker. Thank you. Questions to officers? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to seek clarification on the fact that paragraph 79 of the MPPF, okay, says that we should avoid development of isolated houses, but it doesn't really give, okay, the definition of isolated. But Braintree, okay, which I know that Mike over the past few years has been harping on, so it has actually stuck in my mind, okay, that was all about, the isolation. And I just, and whilst I read in the paper that's been curtailed somewhat by recent decisions, okay, it doesn't really answer the question, because I suppose the question now about isolated decisions, as I understand it, is a definition of far away. And could you please give some clarification so we can understand how much weight we need to give to this particular part of the MPPF? Thank you.
Right, okay. I mean, our starting point for decision taking is the MPPF at the current time, in the absence of our 5-year housing land supply. So we are defaulting down to what we call paragraph 11 as to whether or not there are material considerations outweigh benefits. In terms of paragraph 79 in the Braintree case, of course, that's obviously gone through the courts, and there is a summary on page 63 of your agenda, and that is what we draw upon now, as to whether we are looking at something that is, sort of physically isolated, it's separated. And in this case, we are looking at the location, the relationship to other properties, whether they form what we call like a meaningful cluster. So it's not necessarily meaning that it has to be in the centre of a village or right on the edge, but actually is it forming a group of development? So there is that sort of social connection, it's landscape terms, everything is sort of condensed within a contained area. It is more about that, avoiding that separation and having houses sort of dotted around, but actually, as I say, creating those meaningful clusters. I hope that assists.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Mahaffey, is that your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was hesitant. Just on this question of isolation, this is I'm getting increasingly concerned with a lot of applications outside the settlement boundary and this discussion about isolation because, if I'm honest, I'm not entirely convinced about the MPPF definition of sustainability. And I'd just like to draw the committee's attention and also ask whether or not this was taken into consideration. Planning appeal, you won't know it immediately, but the reference number is 1901724, that went to the inspector, and the conclusion was, I consider that the future occupiers of this proposed dwelling, which could potentially include the elderly children, and those with mobility issues, would be heavily reliant upon the use of the private motor vehicle to gain access to the most basic of services. The reliance of the private car would conflict with the principles set out in the framework, and this weighs heavily against this scheme. So my question is, that's from the planning inspector. How much has this been taken into consideration when looking at this? And there's also another one on our agenda later on.
Firstly, I have to admit I'm not familiar with the appeal case that you are referring to. And of course, we have to consider each application on its own merits. We are in the position where we are having to defer back to the MPPF, and the definitions of the sustainable development haven't changed within the latest MPPF that was released yesterday. So we are still referring to those social, economic and environmental objectives. Having picked up on your concern about the reliance on a private car, and that's not unusual in a countryside location, and that is actually also picked up within the MPPF itself, and it recognises that to create rural communities and to sustain rural communities in terms of their viability, then you are also reliant on supporting other neighbouring communities in the area. So therefore it is likely that you will be relying on a private vehicle. And I think paragraph 78 refers to that. I think it's 103 or 130 in the MPPF, that it does set out that yes, we shouldn't be encouraging development in those very sort of distant locations, but actually it's a balancing act as to how far away we are, what reliance there is on the private vehicle, but it is accepted that there would be some reliance.
Can I have another question on that one, Chair? Thank you very much for that. And that is my problem with the MPPF, is it is a balance. And my question then is, bearing in mind that we've declared a climate emergency, and we sit on CEPs talking about integrated transport strategies, does something like this not conflict with that, and is that taken into consideration?
There is discussion generally about that conflict between traffic and the environmental objectives of sustainable development. That is quite common to have that kind of debate in considering applications. But what we've got to consider are the merits of this application and whether this location is acceptable in sustainability terms. Yes, there would be some reliance on the car, and the MPPF is still acknowledging that, even within the most latest version that we have before us tonight.
Thank you. Any more questions? I can't see any hands. Catherine, you mentioned the phrase you used earlier was a meaningful cluster. Looking at the location, the illustrative layout, the location plan on page 86, there's quite a few other buildings there. Is that what you would call a meaningful cluster?
Yes.
A simple answer, wouldn't it? Thank you. No more questions to the officer? No, in that case, debate. Anybody? If there is no debate, Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'm just looking at the MPPF and paragraph 79. And in there it states that planning policies and decisions should avoid the development of isolated homes in the countryside unless one or more of the following circumstances apply. It's essential for the need for a rural worker. The development would represent an optimal viable use of a heritage asset or will be appropriate enabling development to secure the future of heritage assets. The development would reuse redundant or disused buildings. The development would involve a subdivision of an existing residential dwelling, or if the design was of exceptional quality in that it was truly outstanding and innovative, reflecting the highest standards of architecture, and would help raise standards of design more generally in rural areas, and would significantly enhance its immediate setting. and be sensitive to the defining characteristics of the local area. I'm just wondering, we're considering an outline planning permission here, so I'm just wondering on what part of para 79 would allow us to actually build isolated homes in the community, in the country.
Is that a question to the officers, or?
It was more a rhetorical question for the committee to debate.
Okay, an observation.
A rhetorical question, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else for debate? In which case, Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Sorry, there was quite a lot in what Councillor Frost just said, but can we assume that everything he's just said is mitigated by the definition of meaningful cluster that you asked Catherine to clarify earlier? Is that correct? Does the meaningful cluster argument negate the isolated countryside argument fully? Just for my own sanity at this point.
Thank you, councillors. I think the short answer, councillor, is yes. In the officer's recommendation, it does. I think I understand entirely the point Councillor Frost is raising in terms of the way the NPPF is drafted. It talks about not effectively having isolated dwellings, and then lists those other points when there's an exception to that. But I think the key issue here is that it's the thrust of it is still to avoid having isolated dwellings, and the analysis and assessment that's been made in terms of the officer report, in terms of how Braintree is applied, etc., effectively determines that, in our view and in the recommendation, that it's not isolated in that sense. Yes, it is clearly more distant, and picking up on Councillor Mahaffey's point about access to services and the appeal decision referenced, but I think that needs to be considered in the round, given that we do actually have local plan policy SS6, which does actually permit development in the countryside, provided not isolated still, so there is that caveat, but that's effectively where the NPPF and paragraph 79 comes into play. So I think for all those reasons, that's the basic format behind the recommendation.
Thank you. I see no hands up, so I will move the officer recommendation for approval. Do I have a seconder? Sorry, is that your hand? Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Seconded by Councillor Frost. Thank you. Those in favour of approval? One, two, three, 4, 8. And those against? 3. That is approved. Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. That application has been moved for approval, subject to the conditions and informatives listed within the agenda and the update paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Number 3, 4 Weirvale Cottages, Old Berkeley, Newbury. And we have no speakers, am I correct on that? So, we do have a speaker. Sorry, is this gentleman registered to speak on this?
There's no speaker down.
We have no registered speakers on this. Yeah, okay. If you just take a seat for a moment, we'll sort this out. Thank you. Are they on the right one? Yeah. Thank you. There's obviously been a misprint on the update paper, so if you could come up to the speakers table, that would be helpful. And just wait there whilst the officer introduces the case.
The application is at 4 Weavale Cottages, Old Berkeley, on page 87 of your agenda, for part single-storey, two-storey side and rear extensions, following the removal of a porch with associated alterations, paving, level changes and erection of a boundary fence. The application is for approval subject to conditions on the agenda.
Thank you. To the speaker, could you introduce yourselves, because unfortunately we don't have your name on any paperwork. You will then have 4 minutes to speak. The microphone button is to the right, and you will have 4 minutes, and I'll warn you when you have 1 minute left. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members. My name is Andy Clems. I'm an architect. I'm the agent for the application. Thank you. I don't intend to take a lot of your time this evening. I'm here to support the report and officer's recommendation and to answer any questions from members. If councillors are minded to approve, there's one correction I'd like to request to the condition 5 with the presenting officer's agreement. Chair, that reads at the moment that the development shall not be occupied or the residential use commence, and this relates to a car parking condition. There's no issue regarding the condition, it's appropriate, but as the residence is actually in occupation at the moment, the request is that the words "or the residential use commence" are deleted. Other than that, I'm happy to answer questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clems. Questions to the speaker? I see no hands. Thank you very much. If you could just wipe down in front of you and the buttons on the mic before you leave and return to your main seat, that would be helpful. Questions to officers? No, I have. Councillor Frost, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Officers, you've obviously had a request here for a condition change. I'd just like your views on that first, please.
Yes, given the wording of condition 5, I think yes, it's appropriate to change it because obviously it is an existing property in residential use. So just yeah, to tweak it to refer to that.
Sorry, Chair. Could you just confirm the actual wording of condition 5 then, please, just for the record?
Thank you, Councillor Frost. I think it would effectively mean that condition 5 would read: the development hereby permitted should not be occupied until the property has provision within its curtilage parking of 3 vehicles. So it's effectively the additional development as opposed to the commencement of the residential use, because the residential use by definition is already there.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mahaffey.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. On looking at the plan of this, it looks to me like we are pretty much doubling the footprint of the property, just under the rules on permitted development. Can you comment on that? Is that an issue of any kind?
Well, obviously it's not permitted development because it's beyond the criteria for permitted development, which is why obviously it needs planning permission. It is obviously has an increase in the floor space of the end of terrace property, but given the scale, design, and proportions how it's been designed, it's considered to be appropriate and in keeping with our policies.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? No? Debate? No debate in that. Yeah, Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I actually think, bizarrely, this is probably one of the more straightforward ones this evening. Okay, thankfully. And whilst I think the actual proposed building is very big. It meets within, you know, all the agreement of our officers, and obviously, if anybody has anything to add to the debate, I will obviously listen. But if no one has anything else to add to the debate, I will move for approval of planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor has gone. Ganesh.
I'm happy to second for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Ganesh. It's been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour?
Excuse me, Chair. There was, just as a point of order, Councillor Tomlin had his hand up.
And those against? Didn't think there was. And sorry, Councillor Tomlin, I did miss your hand. Thank you. That is approved. Officer.
The application is approved subject to the conditions and informatives on page 98 onwards. Sorry, and amending condition 5.
Thank you. Item number 4, Wildwood Farm, Newham Lane, Old Basing. If we could have Councillor Peter Blois to the speaker's point. Do we have a Peter Blois here? Thank you, Mr. Blois. If you could just wait whilst the officer introduces the case.
Thank you, Chairman. So this application is for land at Wildwood Farm, Newham Lane, Old Basing. The application seeks planning permission for the erection of 9 dwellings, providing a mix of 3, 4 and 5 bedroom units following the demolition of the existing commercial buildings on site. If I refer members to the update paper, this primarily comprises the setting out of a further representation that was received to the application on behalf of Save Our Loddon Valley Environment Group, and you will see that the concerns are listed within the paper before you. The officer has subsequently responded to those concerns within the subsequent commentary and draws back to the main report. So we are providing that full picture that you have before you this evening. The application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions and informatives within the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Blois, you have 4 minutes, and I will warn you when you have 1 minute left. The microphone button is to the right of the control unit.
Thank you, Chairman. Peter Blois, Chairman of the Old Basing Lichpit Parish Planning Committee, asking you to reject this application. Chairman, Councillors, the character and green space of the Loddon Valley is a highly valued, crucially important part of our community. Our detailed objections are supported by many public comments and objections to this. They include adverse impact on the landscape, outside the settlement policy boundary, the problem of the 5-year supply, proposed development site traffic impact, proximity of the conservation area, effect on biodiversity, danger of significant trees, current proposals and green spaces. Concentrating on just a few, landscape and setting. This is completely at odds, or the recommendation is completely at odds with our neighbourhood plan. The borough's landscape team supported our objections, saying it was unacceptable. Comments from the landscape team included the size and scale of the development is more suited to an urban environment rather than a rural landscape situated on the crest of the hill surrounded by fields. The proposed development would create an impact on the landscape character and visual amenity of this area. So we reject the officer's views on mitigation. Planting a few trees around the edge is not acceptable. How can a small gain of 9 houses outweigh the landscape damage? Dismissing the landscape setting in this fashion is quite inexcusable. The other point, major point, outside the settlement policy boundary, isolated site. We've already had mention of this for another application earlier. The site is in the countryside location, distance from local services. It is acknowledged by the committee in the report, several quotes from that here. Opportunities to maximise sustainable transport solutions are limited. The private car would remain the preferred mode of transport. It conflicts with social and environmental objectives of sustainable development. Quoting again from the committee report, it says it weighs against the development, and that refers to the borough which has declared a climate emergency. How can the application be justified given the almost exclusive car use required? The site is next to and overlaps the Sheila site, old 005. This site was rejected on previous occasions for the same reason: isolated site in the country and transport leaks. The MPPF does not define isolated, and it's difficult to see how this is isolated. You've only got to visit it.
You have 1 minute.
Since the borough were happy to reject old 005 previously because of its isolation, transport, etc., then to be consistent, this should be rejected now. The current lack of the 5-year supply does not render our neighbourhood plan redundant. Before embarking on planning free-for-all, which threatens to ultimately destroy acres of beautiful countryside, reject this now. A lot of time, money and effort has been invested in our parish neighbourhood plan. Neighbourhood and local plans bring a holistic and orderly approach to planning. On its own, this application has no merit, but additionally, it would be foolish not to consider the wider implications. Councillors would be wise to consider that to agree with this would set a precedent not just for Old Basing, but for other areas. You rejected recently a country's St Maryborn, Stoke Road, and you are to be applauded for that, because I quote.
That's right. I'm going to have to ask you to wind up now.
Yes, I'm just winding up. Just give you a quote at the end here from your own thing here. The proposed development, this is the St Maryborn one, the proposed development would, as a result of the inaccessible domesticated encroachment and loss of views into open countryside and potential for residential paraphernalia, erode the rural character and setting. This is the same here. It would do the same. Please reject this application.
Thank you. If you can turn your microphone off, please. Questions to the applicant, to the speaker. Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Just on one specific point, you mentioned that cars would be almost exclusively needed as the form of access to these houses. Bearing in mind the fact that new car sales of petrol and diesel, anything other than electric vehicles, are not going to happen from 2030 onwards, how would that impact on your view that it doesn't align with environmental goals? Because there won't necessarily be non-electric cars accessing the site by the time they're built, presumably.
We're talking about people. These houses are clearly market houses, and I don't see everyone there sticking to the business of electric cars, etc. Quite honestly, if you look at the lane, have you visited it? Has anyone visited it? Did you do that along there? Did you see along Newnham Lane what it's like and how easy or difficult, rather, it is to actually access there, walking or cycling along that narrow lane? It is not the right place. It's also not the right place for affordable housing either. I can't see anyone actually in that area wanting to live there for an affordable house. This is clearly market housing. It won't stay affordable for long.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to cast my mind back to a couple of meetings back, I believe, where did we not give planning permission on a site which is just a bit closer to the Newnham Road, okay, using this track as an access road, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you also say on that application that the Newnham Road, okay, is very dangerous, to which Hampshire County Council said something different?
That, yes, we objected to that, as you know, and this current one we're talking about now and the previous one's all part of a strategy to actually build on old 005, an area which has been attempted to be built on for some time now and rejected for the reasons I've already outlined. And this is the same. Now, you approve that one. It's 2 houses there in a line, but this is 2 houses. No, sorry. The proved one is 2 houses there, isn't it? 2 new houses along that there. Now, it's not as bad as 9 houses along a private lane that goes up into the valley area.
Yeah. Any more questions? I can't see any hands from here, so thank you very much. If you could just wipe the front edge of the desk down, the chair and the buttons on the mic, that would be really helpful. And if you return to your seat, and could you take that's the mic's off, thank you. And if we could have Kate Tuck to the speakers table, please. Thank you. You have 4 minutes. I will give you a warning when you have 1 minute left. Thank you.
Thank you. Save Our Loddon Valley... Oh, is that okay? Sorry. A bit too loud? Save Our Loddon Valley Environment, Solve, objects to this application for many reasons, including those submitted by the Parish Council and residents. You have all seen the detailed submissions, so for brevity I will focus on Local Plan Policy EM1, Landscape Character, and the Old Basing and Litchpit Neighbourhood Plan. Policy EM1, Landscape Character then. The landscape character of the area is unequivocally harmed by this development. The planning inspector, so the person who will ultimately mark your homework on this one, the planning inspector's report of April 2016 stated, a key factor is that potential impact of the water quality of the River Loddon and quality of the natural habitats in the Loddon Valley significantly constrain further development options to the northeast and east of the town. A key factor is that east of the town. He said there are significant environmental considerations, that it is unsustainable. He said that the Loddon Valley forms an effective barrier to further significant growth of the town to the east beyond the allocations of the plan, for landscape and nature conservation reasons. If the planning inspector can say no, I am not sure why anyone would go against that. The proposed development is clearly in complete contravention of the OBNL Neighbourhood Plan and Village Design Statement. The proposal does not comply with the Neighbourhood Plan Policy 3 settlement policy boundary. It is outside the SPB and as such is demonstrably housing in the wrong location. There is absolutely nothing that can be said to mitigate this fundamental flaw. It does not comply with the Neighbourhood Plan Policy 4, protection of iconic views. East of Piatt's Hill, the landscape widens into an extensive shallow bowl comprising the valley floor of grassland and arable farmland, sparsely inhabited by a few scattered farmhouses and copses. Either side of the valley to the northwest and southeast are small rolling hills, heavily wooded, which frame the valley landscape. The Borough Council Landscape Capacity Study 2010 characterises the area as possessing important linear views down the valley, with limited scope for mitigation without damage to its character.
It is an intimate landscape with a sense of tranquility and feels remote from the settlement, with numerous sinks, ancient woodland sites and the two salmonid rivers. It's a biodiversity opportunity area and a biodiversity project area. The proposal does not comply with Neighbourhood Plan Policy 7 appearance of development. It does not have sympathetic regard to the scale, siting, roof lines, which respect the character of the area or landscape features.
You have 1 minute.
Finally, I have to mention the loss of 8 jobs that this would entail, a hardship at any time, but especially cruel right now. So in summary, the planning inspector's view of the landscape character says no to this development. The neighbourhood plan says no to this development. What will you have the courage to say? Thank you.
Thank you. Questions to the Speaker, and if people don't mind, I'll start it myself, followed by Councillor Tomlin. Looking at the buildings that are there, how do you feel that houses will be more detrimental to the landscape character, bearing in mind what's there is not pretty?
I do accept that what's there is not attractive, but it is change management at its best, isn't it? You set something up so that it's more terrible than the thing you want to move somebody towards doing. And if you look at the history of the planning of that site and the change of what's the word? It's not conditions. The lawfulness, certificate of lawfulness. Thank you. You'll see that there's been a steady progress over the last decade or so. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Can you help me on the location plan, perhaps whether that could pop up? The valley and the views you were describing. I know the lane, but I've not jumped out of the car and had a look over the fence, so to speak. Can you give us an idea of the topography of the land on that plan, where the valley runs from to? Is it above? Is the site, sorry, the proposed site above or below? Yeah, thank you.
Yep. So at the top of that plan is where the river is. It runs across the top of the plan. So the new development is at the side, at the top on the side of the valley. So it has a very prominent position. It looks down across the valley. And there's some really lovely views there, some really mature, there's a veteran oak at the bottom on the left. And it's just rolling countryside, mosaic with the river pattern, with the, there we've got peat bogs, fantastic carbon sinks. I mean, the whole thing it's a lovely rural matrix. And certainly looking at the recent information that's coming about chalk stream catchment areas, I'm just staggered that we're having a conversation about not protecting a chalk stream catchment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I see no hands. Thank you very much. If you could wipe the chair and the table and the microphone button down, that would be really helpful. And if we could have Nick Cobbold to the table, please. Thank you, Mr. Cobbold. You have 4 minutes, and I will warn you when you have 1 minute left. Microphone button is to the right of the deck.
Thank you, Chairman. I have prepared this, but I suspect I need to rip it up and start afresh from what we've just heard from the Parish Council and from Solve, as they name themselves, who appear to be one and the same. Just to start by saying, it's a bit disappointing that this application's been running for 8 months and Solve have surfaced in the last week to put together their long-winded objection to this application, but it is what it is. Chairman, I think you hit the nail on the head there with your question. Why haven't they taken into account, and why has it not been considered against what is there on the site at the moment? We've just heard 4 minutes from each speaker telling us that it's harmful visually, and that there's all end of harm coming from the proposed development, with not one consideration given to what is there at the moment. It doesn't matter how it's evolved up on the site. It has evolved. It's all lawful. It is a fallback of a lawful use there on the site, which will remain there in perpetuity because no enforcement action is possible against it. I'll deal with the Schlar submission quickly. That was a wider submission of a lot of the land around this area, which was ruled out at the time because the council was looking for housing allocations. This is previously developed land, and it has a policy, which again we've not heard at all from the parish council or Solve, SS6, which actually allows for redevelopment of previously developed land. Why have they not considered this? Why is it not fundamental to their consideration? We've dealt with isolation, paragraph 80, paragraph 79, it changed yesterday, but it's by the by. The council has already concluded on the frontage that the site isn't isolated. That's 200 metres away from this site. I don't see how this can be suddenly deemed as an isolated site, but more so when you consider the vehicle movements associated with the current use compared with the vehicle movements associated with the proposed use. The automatic traffic count collected 100 vehicle movements, some HGVs associated with the existing use, whilst the TRIX database tells us that we're going to have approximately 50 vehicle movements with the proposed use, halving the amount of vehicles. So the isolation question and the highway safety question, they rather fall by the wayside again when you compare it to what is there at the moment. I'll deal with the Loddon Valley. As you've seen, it's some distance to the north. It is a valley. We are on the top of the valley. This site is on the top of the valley. Yes, you can say that's a prominent location, but you can also say it's not in the valley, which is what the policies which have been quoted, or the landscape appraisals that have been quoted, are suggesting should be protected. But let's not forget that this is a scheme replacing a pretty ropey bunch of buildings and containers and the rest of it on the site. It will improve the rim of the valley. It will have no impact on the valley itself, in my opinion. Couple of quick other things. Conservation area is 400 metres away. Again, the improvements on the proposals outweigh any impact, to be honest, even if you think the distance is close enough that it could impact the conservation area. Thank you very much. Affordable housing. I know how keen this committee is on affordable housing. This proposal delivers affordable housing. We could make it smaller, but then that would be at the expense of the affordable housing. So I have a bit of concern about what the parish just said about the affordable housing and the disregard for it. I think it's important. I think it's important that everyone pulls their weight and delivers affordable housing, if possible. I've just heard to say in the right place. Well, why isn't this the right place? It's a site. It's a site where it's entirely the right place. So 9 new dwellings, replacing some poor existing buildings. I think it's a great scheme. I think you should approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions to the Speaker? Councillor Tomlin, followed by Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mr. Cobbold. Thank you for your presentation. Can you tell me, in this development, what steps you might take or you're planning to take to help the borough with its zero carbon targets, please?
I think, at risk of sounding like a broken record, part of the answer to that is going to be, well, you're replacing very poor buildings with poor insulation, which have big frontages, open frontages, high energy costs, etc. You're replacing them with a modern housing development which will satisfy the building regulation standards. It can go beyond satisfying building regulation standards. It can incorporate more sustainability functions, facilities, whatever word you want to use. That is controlled outside of the planning remit, and the building regulations get ever harder as we go along. But there will be all number of sustainable measures which have to be incorporated into the design.
Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to your point about the tricks, can you give a bit more detail on that? Because what you've mentioned slightly different to what it's mentioned on the transport statement. Thank you.
I read the transport statement literally as one of the last things I read before leaving the office earlier. And I am going off the top of my head, I haven't got it here in front of me, but the ATC, the automatic traffic counter, churned up 100 vehicle movements a day from the strips. They're the rubber strips which go on the road. The TRICS database suggested 51, it might have been, vehicle movements associated with the proposed use. Unless I've misread something, I'm pretty sure and I'm pretty confident that those are the figures, I should say, set out in the transport statement.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions to the speaker? I can't see any hands up. So thank you very much. If you could wipe the front of the table down, the microphone buttons and the arms of your chair. And if we could have Councillor Raphael and Councillor Cubitt.
Hi, can we just clarify? I read up on the Constitution, it said each ward councillor is permitted 4 minutes each. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Excellent. I'll let Councillor Raphael start first.
Thank you. You have
Ms.
4
Raphael,
minutes,
yeah.
and I will warn you when you have 1 minute left. If you just wait until the officer has introduced the case.
What? We've done that. You've been
Sorry, we've done that,
distracted
haven't
by
we?
the mayor.
I'm going round in circles. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to address the meeting. The main objection from our officers as consultees is landscape. And it says on page 114, by virtue of its size and scale, the proposed development would urbanise this part of the countryside, causing adverse impacts on the landscape character and visual amenity of the area. They are strong words and measured words dealing with the application. And in answer to one of your councillors, one of your members' comments or questions to others about what's the difference between what's there now and what would be there with this proposal, this is substantially bigger. It covers the whole site rather than a barn in part of it. The roof heights are substantially higher, and therefore it's substantially more prominent when seen from within the valley and afar. That is why the officers have said what they've said. They haven't said it would make no difference, it would cause negligible harm. They have a strong objection to it. And it's a strong objection based upon the words that you've heard read to you by others this evening about the overall importance of the Loddon Valley to its contribution to the borough, it being a north-facing chalk stream set in unspoilt rural landscape. You should not fear having that objection as being the major one if you were to oppose this going forwards. There have been at least 2 successful appeals won by this council where they have taken landscape as a reason for objection and won on appeal, and where it's been the only objection, in fact. So if you believe it is strong enough, go for it and oppose this. My second reason for objecting to this is because of its sustainability. And again, answering the question that others have been posed by one of your number, what has the applicant done to make this a sustainable application? Well, first of all, consider the context. You're not dealing with one large country house where they have 4 cars and they're always going to have 4 cars going forward. You've got affordable housing. People who may not have the means or ability to have their own vehicle or their own highly expensive electric vehicle going forwards. And yet affordable housing in the middle of nowhere and creating a community in the middle of nowhere. And the applicant could have said, oh, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give up some more land and put a cycle path through to the centre of Old Basing. Or I could have given up some more land and put a footpath round the edge of my fields into the centre of Old Basing. Or I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure there's a district heating scheme is installed, and I'll plan that out and explain how I'm going to do it. But none of that. These are market houses setting up a community in the middle of nowhere where people will be required to live who may find it an unaffordable and unsustainable location to live. So for those 2 reasons, I'd ask you to oppose this.
Thank you. Questions to Councillor Raffel. Councillor Howard Sorrell.
I would just ask you to clarify. You said at one point in your speech that you think the new buildings will be taller than the existing buildings. I can't find the facts and figures within the document in front of me, or I couldn't, at least in the time I had during your speech. Can you give me the figures on that?
Might be best as a question to officers. They should have some idea, probably be able to answer that better. But Councillor Raffel can answer it. Please do.
Point of order, Chair. Could you please admonish, the members of the public for actually answering questions and coaching? I'm sure Councillor Raffel is perfectly able, after his length of service, in the council and speech making in the chambers, to actually answer the questions on his own remark. Thank you.
Councillor Raffel.
Chairman, thank you. Yes, I think officers confirm this, but you can do it from the plan. The heights at some of the buildings, not all of them, some of them are 10 metres and the barn is 7. That's our understanding.
Any more questions for Councillor Raffel? I see no hands, so thank you, Councillor Raffel. Councillor Cubitt. Councillor Cubitt, you have 4 minutes, so we'll warn you when you have 1 minute left.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much, committee members. I'm not going to repeat what everyone else has said, but in terms of the landscape impact, I'm not sure anyone's mentioned the fact that Oliver's Battery, which is a very significant ancient monument, can also see this site. A couple of other issues that haven't been raised so far. I understand that the dustbins will not be collected from the site because it's going to be an unadopted road. If you look at the papers for tonight on page 130, and I understand from the resident who lives up there that her dustbin is not collected, and Hampshire has said that they will not adopt the road. Secondly, the lady who lives up the lane has a septic tank. So we are very confused as to where the mains are, but the applicant says that there are mains, but she's not aware of them. She's lived there for a very long time, I understand. So the arguments in relation to the adverse impact to the landscape study is extensive. I've raised the subject of Oliver's Battery. The effect on the trees on page 126 are highlighted, and I would urge members to look at page 126 where it says that there are some significant concerns. What I want to focus your attention on and what hasn't been discussed so far is the sink, Gravelly Bottom Copse. It is right next door to and abuts the site, and it is referred to in the natural environment section on pages 123, 125 and 126 and 127 in relation to character and in relation to natural environment. I have very serious concerns about this sink, Gravelly Bottom Copse, and I have very serious concerns in relation to comments that the inspector made back in 2005. I have evidence of the inspector's comments then on the sinks that exist to the east of Basing, where the inspector said that the impact of residential development close to sinks of ancient woodlands cannot be materially removed, that they have a material impact. So I question on page 134 in the summing up by our officers in the planning balance the reference to it overcoming the MPPF page 6, para 11, specifically D, I, and Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2. I don't believe that this application addresses the impact that it will have on the sink, Gravelly Bottom Copse, and I also don't think it addresses the very negative impact on the biodiversity opportunity area. And I don't think it is addressed by paragraph 177 of the MPPF either, where it says the presumption in favour of sustainable development does not apply where the plan is likely to have significant effect on habitat sites. This site could not be closer to the sink, and in fact, it states in the in the document that you have before
you have 1 minute.
Yeah, it states in the document you have before you that the biodiversity officer peculiarly does not raise objections despite the fact that the buffers aren't going to be significant enough to protect the ancient woodland, and that the sink is not protected and the BOA is not protected. And in final commentary, the applicant made a reference to the fact that the environmental impact would be much better if the sheds were removed. These are sheds. We're talking about houses. We're talking about cars. We're talking about houses. We're talking about sewage. We're talking about septic tanks potentially. We're talking about soakaways. We're talking about damaging the sink. We're talking about potentially damaging trees as identified by our tree officers. So this has an enormous negative impact on our special sink and our BOA. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Cubitt? I don't see any hands. I have no questions. So thank you, Councillor Cubitt.
Thank you very much, Mr.
If
Chairman.
you could have a quick wipe down on your as you leave.
Feel I'm in a hospital. I
Thank
thought
you.
we'd had Freedom Day.
Right. Freedom Day it may be, but the lurgy is still around. Questions to officers? Oh, lots of hands. Councillor Harvey, followed by Councillor Mahaffey.
Thank you, Chair. Could the officers clarify for us, is it on mains drainage or is it via a septic tank? What is the facts of that matter? And secondly, how do you deal with the situation of having no waste collection service to the properties, but rather the properties have to service the main lane for waste collection?
Okay, in answer to your first question about whether it is on mains drainage or not, I'm afraid I don't have that information in front of me. But of course, we have existing buildings on there as commercial premises, so I would presume that they already have some existing mechanism to deal with any foul sewage. With regards to the refuse collection, that is addressed within your report, in which the officer has acknowledged that there is a situation in which the refuge wouldn't access this particular site, but then the bins would have to be taken to the highway where they can be collected, as is the situation with the existing properties that already live down that road. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mahaffey.
Thank you, Chair. I expect I think the answer to my question is a 5-year land supply issue, but I recall when I've sat on this committee previously, we've been given very clear instructions about rural needs assessments for settlement for applications like this. Why do we no longer see rural needs assessments?
I have to admit I am not familiar with rural needs assessments in the current context.
Sorry, Councillor Maffey, in what regard?
In regards to, this is something actually, Mike, I recall you telling us about the need for rural, the needs to prove that there is a. Have I got my wording wrong? I've got my wordings wrong.
Sorry, Councillor Maffey. Apologies. I think you mean in relation to rural exception sites. Is that what you mean? Because there are policies governing that in terms of demonstrating a need for affordable housing, where the entirety of the site is put forward as an exception to normal policy for that. Whereas in this instance, it's a regular development, if you like, in terms of it is proposing both market and affordable housing in this instance. So it's not a rural exception site as such.
No, that's not quite it. But we're clearly not going to get to the bottom of it. I recall an instance where you particularly said that developments had to prove that there was a rural need, and we had a long debate about the difference between a rural need and a market need.
I believe that may be in relation to policy SS6 then, under the various points there. So that's either in relation to where you're demonstrating a rural need in terms of agricultural need for a development, or alternatively it may be under policy SS6E, which is for small-scale development where there's a proven local need, where it's agreed for 4 dwellings, or for up to 4 dwellings, sorry, where there's a local need demonstrated. But in this instance, this is proposing 9. It's actually proposing under a separate element of policy SS6. This is under policy SS6A in relation to, or majority under SS6A, in relation to redevelopment of previously developed land. So that's why effectively there isn't then the requirement to show a particular need to meet that test.
Thank you. I think I need some clarity on this later on if I could catch you up. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got three hands up. Councillor Howard Sorrell, followed by Councillor Gaskell, followed by Councillor Tomlin.
Councillor Harvey beat me to the punch with my questions, so thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Gaskell.
Thank you. I've been reliably informed that it is on a cesspit, this unit, from a person who used to work there. I don't believe there are any sewer mains there to join on to. My other comment is regarding the wheelie bins. Obviously, it's going to be arduous taking 2 wheelie bins 400 metres there and back every day. But my concern is the road at the bottom. We discussed it when we were discussing the 2 properties which came up 2 meetings ago. There's not much room down there. There's nowhere to store bins other than on the highway. All the other properties down there have drives which you could probably store a bin in the drive, so it's not actually on the highway. And we do have quite a lot of agricultural machines which are quite big, which probably need the full width of the lane. So if we get a situation like we've got this week where we've got bin services off duty and we've got to leave our bins out for a couple of days, there's a potential for bins to get hit, get knocked over, litter to go over a very sensitive area with the River Loddon just down the lane from it. So I have a number of concerns there. Has anything come up about the bin storage other than being on a highway?
I'm not familiar with any particular issue that has been raised in this context of this application. I'm relying on the information that is before us. I would also draw members' attention to condition 20 on page 142, which actually asks for the details of a scheme for the storage prior to disposal of refuge and recycling containers. So we would be looking to have further details submitted to us for approval, should that assist with your concerns.
Okay, but we won't be able to comment on that.
It is something that would be assessed by officers. Of course, we do regular consultations to our waste client team as well for their advice.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. On the block plan, in fact the one we have there, I can't see it from here and I can't read it on my plan, but in the curtilage of the site, that lower shape, if you like, the buildings are, I assume the existing buildings are shown. In relation to the pictures that we have, could we just have a look and relate, please, some of those buildings to some of the pictures, i.e. particularly that large one that we saw, the large shed. Yeah, so is that right? Sorry, were they 2 separate buildings just flashed up then, or was it a view? I'm just confused how many large buildings there are there. Is it every one of these ones we see on this plan is a building like that? Sorry.
If I can assist, yes, I was going to direct members to the key that is in the top corner of the visualiser presentation before you. And you can see the orange arrows which the case officers helpfully provided to sort of indicate and set out sort of where those views are taken across the site, so you can see the variety of the buildings. As I understand it, when you look at page 146, at the top of the page you have the location plan, so therefore you can see in the dark shaded areas within the site the existing buildings, and then of course at the bottom you have the proposed block plan, so you can sort of look at that difference. But as I say, I think the best advice to give you is to refer to the the photographs and the key that has been provided.
Sorry, okay, Joe. So it was leading to my question then. Basically, it looks like there's one large building, which is this one we're seeing there. In the officer's opinion then, for permitted development rights, is that a building that could quite easily be converted into dwellings? Sorry.
Without having a particular scheme before us, it would be very difficult to confirm. I mean, I would clarify that there are permitted development rights available, subject to a prior approval application to the local planning authority for the conversion of commercial buildings, agricultural buildings, buildings in the countryside to residential properties. But again, it is subject to an assessment against a number of criteria which we would undertake on the production of an application to us. So it would be very difficult to confirm that, yes, it would definitely be convertible, but as I say, those permitted development rights do exist.
Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Seeing those pictures has jogged my memory. I had a question earlier, didn't I, that Councillor Rafael couldn't answer about the heights of the buildings. Can the officers comment on that at all? Did the information given earlier reflect the reality of the plans? Or?
I'm afraid I don't have those measurements before me of the existing buildings or of the proposed, unfortunately.
Any more questions for the officers? Councillor Court.
I'm still trying to clarify this business of isolated, because the wording on page 118 seems to suggest it is isolated, and yet there's a last sentence here that suggests there's a thin thread of a ribbon which could almost be used to indicate it's not. Could you give me some clarification, please?
The officer considering the application who has been to the site has assessed its relationship to the local settlement. So in the view of the officers, it's not considered to be wholly isolated, but the phrase marginally isolated is cited. But again, I would refer you to that sort of judgment that we are making, as set out on page 118, is this site far away from other places, building and people? Is it remote? Which is the question for you to consider.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Any more questions? No hands up, in which case, debate. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Listening closely to all the commentary we've had this evening and quite a vociferous debate from the public speakers and then the evidence is in the report, I have considerable concerns about the landscape impact. Looking at the valley, looking at historic inspectors' comments, looking at the impact of the issues of it. Just go through the issues. It's not all previously developed land. There's an officer commenting here that it isn't. It is marginally isolated, therefore it is isolated in a context. There is conflict with paragraph 79 of the NPPF. We're clear in there that it's not clear in terms of the NPPF elements here. The impact on the ancient woodland is significant in my opinion. The impact on the sink is significant in my opinion. The impact on the Loddon Valley is significant in my opinion, and so on. So I do think the landscape arguments are quite considerable. I really do, and I don't see the application overcomes them at all. The proposals are what they are in front of us, and it's a full application, so I think that's important to consider. So the height, the scale, the massing, the positioning, the layout, all of that has an impact. The idea that it's not in the valley, I don't agree with at all. And the context of it being urban development, I do understand that and I see that. The issue of the bins is one that concerns me. The idea of lugging those wheelie bins up that lane is a concern. And the idea of having no mains drainage is also a concern. However, were I to move a recommendation for refusal, which I'm minded to, I would go on landscape grounds as being the strongest that we would have to go against the development as proposed. And I am minded to move rejection on the grounds of landscape.
Councillor Hussey, followed by Councillor Mahaffey.
We're talking about a rural landscape, and therefore the landscape officer's views should bear some weight. And the report says it erodes the landscape and visual qualities of the rolling landscape. But the counter-argument is it's appreciated the proposed development will be at odds with the prevailing pattern. The report goes on and on. There are many negatives about this application which have been highlighted by the landscape officer, and then officers who, let's say, probably appreciate what the landscape officer has said, but are looking more towards urbanisation. And I just wonder why we bother to ask the landscape officer to make a contribution. They're not mixing. Sorry, I'm losing myself for words here. The landscape officer is quite clear the words used are quite strong words. And I don't understand how other officers can come to the recommendation that we should approve the application. Councillor Harvey has given me a wonderful in, because I would propose refusal. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey, did you propose it?
That's what I said at the end, but if Ron wants to propose it, I'll second it. It's happy either way, to be perfectly honest. As long as it's proposals on the table, I have no issue.
I'll take it as a proposal from Councillor Harvey and a seconder from Councillor Hussey. And I have got any more speakers? Councillor Mahaffey, followed by, sorry, it was Councillor Tomlin was first, followed by Councillor Mahaffey, I believe.
Thanks, Chair. Well, I totally support the arguments put forward by our previous two councillors. Yes, we've seen the impact in planning inspectors' terms of impacts on historic monuments. This Oliver's Battery, the sink at Gravelly, is it Gravelly Bottom? Yes. So I think that and the landscape officer, that there's a big key thing. But I also see that this is it's one of the most isolated applications, in my opinion, that we have seen for some time. I can't see it as part of any ribbon development or anything like that. Yes, the higher up it was with two houses, but this is totally isolated. The only thing is it was an existing building, so there is a brownfield thing. But it's, in terms of the impact it would have, again, with the size and the style of housing, that goes back to the landscape. But it's the sustainability element. It is totally reliant on the car, and I just see the environmental objective when we look at the MPPF. It would be met in relation to planting, delivering a net gain to biodiversity. The dwellings would also be required to meet energy efficient standards, etc., etc. And we've heard that tonight, that they're just going to build these to the building regs because that's all they have to do. So I don't think we're going to get any benefit by having this on the environment. So I think that it misses those tests as well. So I support rejection of this application. Thank you.
Councillor Mahaffey.
Thank you, Chair.
And Councillor Frost, and then I think we'll take it straight to the vote after Councillor Frost.
3 points I've written down that I wanted to make. One is to repeat my concerns that I raised in with relation to the Bishop's Green application, and Councillor Tomlin's just made this the remark about sustainability. I think this is equally applicable here. The second thing, point's been made about landscape officer. I fully support that. Why do we have a landscape officer if we're going to ignore it? But the third thing that's not been mentioned is if this is counter to the neighbourhood plan, we're going to be very pushed as a council that is supporting and trying to encourage our parishes to develop their neighbourhood plan. We're going to be in a very difficult position if we approve this. Thank you.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with all the comments that Councillor Mahaffey's just made. The only nagging thing in the back of my mind is the lack of 5-year land supply, and should the applicant be minded to take it to the inspectorate, the building inspectorate, it will be interesting to see how our decision will come back there. Okay. However, I'm very supportive of the motion that's on the table, and it'll be interesting to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I put it to the vote, we need some reasons. Councillor Harvey.
My reason would be simply on the grounds of landscape impact and the severity of that based upon the issues of the ancient woodland and the sink, the impact on the Loddon Valley, so the environmental impact, and the landscape officer's comments accordingly. I would move the other reasons for approval to one side, and I have a singular reason for rejection, which is landscaping that conduct, as I've said.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey, and I can speak to that part in a moment if that's okay, and then I'll come back. I was just going to focus in on just on the motion around landscape impact, and picking up some of the comments councillors have made. I mean, just to clarify in relation to the weight to be attributed to the landscape officer's comments, because I know Councillor Hussey and I think Councillor Mahaffey have both raised that point in commentary. Yes, the landscape officer's comments as a consultee are a material consideration, but they are exactly that. They're not determinative, they're not directive in any way, and effectively the officer's report then seeks to set out the issues in the round and has clearly come to a different view. Equally, this committee has to come to their own value judgment as to whether the landscape harm is of significance or not, as point one. But in doing that, you do need to consider, take into account the material consideration of what is on site as well. So that is within the context of effectively identifying the landscape harm in terms of what is on site compared to what is proposed, as point one. Then point two, picking up on Councillor Frost's commentary around 5-year supply. The test is then under paragraph 11 of the NPPF, where you have to be satisfied that having identified adverse harm, that is significantly and demonstrably outweighing the benefits of the scheme. So you have to have weighed, if you like, the benefits of the housing supply being provided, the affordable housing being provided, and any other benefits that you may see fit to still reach that level, to then be satisfied that it is something that you would refuse. Picking up on the motion Councillor Harvey's put forward specifically, it is obviously on a single point of landscape impact, and therefore, Councillor, I would suggest that it would be more on the basis of policy EM1 and the relevant policies, I believe OBNL 7 of the neighbourhood plan in relation to landscape impact, as opposed to necessarily impact on the sinks or ancient woodland, which more relates to the impact on kind of biodiversity related issues as opposed to direct visual landscape impact, which I understand to be the main purpose of the motion.
I hear the nuance that you're coming up with, and I'm happy to go with that.
Councillor Hussey, as seconder, you have a point to raise?
I would just like the detail of the reasons for refusal read out before we move on to the next item. I just want to make certain that all the points which I would like to see in the reason for refusal listed, please.
Councillor Hussey, I'm not clear whether you're suggesting that you want to add additional reasons for refusal over and above the single reason that Councillor Harvey's given. If you do, then I would suggest that you need to withdraw from being seconder, because you wouldn't be seconding Councillor Harvey's proposal, which is a single reason for refusal, and the chair will need to look for another seconder.
I certainly won't withdraw my seconding. It is when Councillor Harvey, he did a praise fee basically. He didn't dot the I's and cross the T's. One of the important statements made in here, and not by the landscape officer, will be at odds with the prevailing pattern of more scattered properties. This is eroding the landscape. I would like that. I want some meat on the bones. Okay?
Councillor Harvey.
No, thank you, Chair. I mean, picking up Councillor Hussey's point, it is relevant to policy EM1 and also policies OBL7 and referred to in terms of the local neighbourhood plan policies. That would capture what Councillor Hussey is saying. The narrative that Councillor Hussey is giving is relevant because it's relevant to those policies, but the wording of the policy is that which I would see go forward as the reason for recommendation. I accept that both the sink, the impact on the ancient monument, and also the impact on the ancient woodland are secondary comments rather than specific reasons for rejection, and they may well be used in argument because we've used them in argument round the table this evening, but the reasons for rejection stand on policy, and it's policy EM1, and it's the local Old Basing and Parish Council's neighbourhood plan policies that Mr Townend has already referenced, and the narrative is exactly as Ron suggested as the wording of the officers have in the report itself, and to use the report importantly in that way because we use the officers' comments to reinforce what we're doing is making the decision.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded for refusal. One moment. Back to Mike.
Sorry, Chair. One thought in terms of the motion. The recommendation was for approval, and it included the requirement of a Section 106 agreement for affordable housing as well. So the motion would normally include effectively the fact that hasn't been completed as yet as a second reason for refusal, which is relatively standard as members will be familiar with.
I'm happy to accept that if Ron is, if that's a... Ron, are you happy to accept that as my second?
Councillor Hussey, are you happy to accept the second reason for refusal on grounds of affordable housing? Thank you. Right, it has been moved and seconded for refusal. Those in favour of refusal? That's all of them. Sorry, those against? That is refused for the reasons given. Catherine.
So thank you, Chairman. That application has been refused for 2 reasons, considering the landscape impact contrary to policy EM1 of the local plan and OBL7 of the neighbourhood plan. And a second reason for the absence of a section 106 to secure the affordable housing contrary to policy CN1. Thank you.
Thank you. Last item on the agenda, item 5, 4 Cranesfield, Sherborne St John, and if we could have James and Christine Rowley to the speakers table, please. If we just wait a couple of minutes whilst Councillor Hussey gets back. If we could have James and Christine Rowley to the speakers table, please. Looks like we're adjourning for 5 minutes. Right. Application number 5, which is for Cranesfield, Sherborne, St John. Yeah, Nicola, if you could introduce the case.
Members should note that this is for Cranesfield, Sherborne, St John for the erection of a detached garage on page 156 of the agenda. There's nothing to report on the agenda, on the update, sorry, and the recommendation is for approval subject to conditions.
Thank you. Speakers, you have 4 minutes, and I will warn you when you have 1 minute left. Microphone button is to the right of the console.
There we are. Thank you. I'm James Rowley. I've been asked to speak on behalf of all of our neighbours who've written in, and 12 objections were submitted to the original application, and a further 9 letters strongly objecting to the revised plans which you're considering this evening. So we don't feel that the weight of local opposition which remains has been clearly reflected in the report, which tends to lump the various points together. So it's not clear which of these points have been resolved. We feel that the revised plans are still an overdevelopment of the front garden area and don't overcome the majority of the objections, with the roof height only being marginally reduced, still excessively high at 4.5 metre at the ridge, and the footprint of the building still excessive at 46 metres in area in relation to the plot. We feel that insufficient weight has been given to our concerns raised on the impact of a new building, its size and the loss of existing trees, hedges and the rural character of this part of the village. The conservation area appraisal notes that the newer properties in this area are characterised by larger front gardens leaving space for landscaping. There are no comparable examples of large double garages within the front gardens in Cranesfield at present, and the garage referred to at number 20 is at the side of that property and adjoins the neighbour's front garden. Number 10 and particularly number 11 would be most affected by this development because our rear gardens adjoin the applicant's front garden, which I think is unusual, but it means that there is more impact. And it will also affect the outlook and visual amenities from other adjoining properties at numbers 3, 5, 6 and 13 due to its height and the mass of the building. Contrary to the statement recognising the impact on number 11's amenities, but suggesting this is not significantly harmful, we feel that there will be a significant adverse effect due to overshadowing and loss of outlook. This will be even more pronounced from autumn onwards when the trees and hedge are not in leaf, which the officer refers to as mitigating the effect on our adjoining garden, as we will look directly onto a large expanse of brick wall and tiled roof. As you can see from the plan, the site plan, although it's stated that the garage width would only occupy 7.6 metres of our 17.3 metre rear boundary, as number 4 already projects 3 metres along in the right-hand corner, this will occupy half the remaining area. We don't agree that this is acceptable in terms of the Council's policy EM10 or the Design and Sustainability SPD, as although the hipped roof would keep the eaves lower, as recommended in the SPD, the garage will still be over-dominant due to its size and height, result in a cramped and cluttered appearance of the property from the street scene, and with the loss of mature trees and landscaping, contrary to your policies. We are concerned about the loss of mature trees covered by the original outline landscaping condition and the covenants which can only be released with the Council's consent. We don't see how a hedge and protection condition can be effective, as the hedge doesn't appear to be shown accurately, which is the 100-year-old laurel hedge on their front garden boundary, and it also appears.
I have to ask you to wind up fairly quickly, please.
Okay. So we don't feel this condition will be effective because no gap has been retained for protection. For these reasons, we would ask that the application is refused as submitted.
Thank you. Questions to the speaker? Okay, if nobody else has, I have one. The hedge that's between what I assume is your garden and the applicant's garden, can you give us any indication of what that hedge is actually consists of in terms of vegetation?
It's well, I think you can see it's quite a mixture, really. The largest tree is a silver birch tree, which is on the sort of midpoint, and this proposed garage that would be on the left, just seen on the left-hand side of those pictures to the rear of the van. So the rear corner of this garage will be less than ½ a metre from the trunk of the silver birch tree, which is in that hedge boundary. The rest of it is a mixture of there's lilac and a range of sort of shrubs and trees, so which appear to form part of the original landscaping scheme. The hedge on the front boundary is an original laurel hedge which was planted over 100 years ago and appears on old village plans. That's on the right hand side of that picture. There we are.
Thank you. And also you mentioned a covenant. Could you explain to us what that covenant actually covers?
It does protect trees and hedges that were planted as part of the landscaping scheme for Cranesfield, and it also specifically covers the laurel hedge on the right hand side there. There is another limb which covers erecting dwellings and buildings within the garden areas as well.
Thank you. Councillor Mahaffey.
Thank you, Chair. The Parish Council says that the plans received are not an accurate portrayal of the site in question. I'm not sure if that's just a referral to the trees or not. Do you think that what we have in front of us actually reflects what's on the ground?
I think the dimensions of the proposed garage appear to be accurate. We're not convinced that the hedge has been accurately surveyed on the right-hand side, and also that the width of the existing vegetation on the northern boundary, which adjoins us, rather than trim back, that would be substantially reduced to leave only a metre between the back of the building and the rear fence. So from our point of view as neighbours, it's the trees and hedgerow that aren't shown very accurately.
Any more questions? No. Oh, yes.
Just a quick one. How many dwellings are there actually in Cranesfield in total?
Sorry, I think it's between 40 and 50.
If there are no more questions, thank you very much. If you could just wipe the front of the table down, the microphone button and the arms of your chair for the benefit of the next speaker. Thank you. And if we could have Steve Cotterill to the... Thank you, Mr. Cotterill. You have 4 minutes, and I will try to remind you when there is 1 minute left.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Obviously, as you've just heard there from the objector, there's a number of points I just want to go through. In terms of the covenants that's been referred to, I believe it's actually just a planning condition, which I'm assuming obviously the officers will take you through shortly. The condition is for the hedge that's to the right, so the large laurel hedge that is to the right, and not the hedge between number 11's garden and obviously the proposed site. This is confirmed by the officers in the report. With regards to the scaling and the sizes of the actual hedges and the positions of the trees, through the process of the actual application and the design process, working with the officers, they asked me to go back and recheck the positions, which I did do, and I believe they are as accurate as I can make them. Obviously, it was some time ago, so obviously things have grown. Hedges do grow. In terms of the actual size of the garage, obviously there's some concerns over the actual ridge height. Now again, through the process working with the officer, the ridge height was actually reduced down to 4.5 metres, which is where the officer has actually said that they are happy with the scheme, hence obviously recommending approval. In some of the objections that have also come forward, there's concerns about whether a room could be used upstairs or whether there is any sort of space in this garage to actually do it. Now, 4.5 metres doesn't actually give you enough space to do anything like that, so it would just be general couple of cardboard boxes thrown up there. You're not going to get anything else in. I believe there's a condition that the officer wants to put onto the approval, which again I'm in full agreement with, in terms of that it cannot be converted to separate dwellings, cannot be used in connection with any business or anything like that. So that's obviously from the applicant's point of view, is fully acceptable. In terms of the loss of outlook for the objector that we've heard from and the overshadowing and the concerns there, the only thing that I would say there is about perspective angle. I'm sure you all are aware that hedge is sort of I think it's getting on for 3 metres, just over 3 metres. So by the time you actually look at where the objector will be able to actually see that garage in his garden, with the hedge there, I don't believe that the ridge height is actually that imposing on the design. You can see it there in terms of the size of the vehicle that's there. I mean, that's a fairly large van, isn't it? In terms of the loss of the trees, the tree officer has actually looked at the application, and the parish council did try for a TPO to be put onto the trees, which was rejected by the tree officer. And in the officer's report, you will see that it's stated by the tree officer that the trees are not in.
You have 1 minute.
Yep, not in the best kind of position in terms of being able to allow them to grow and fully mature. Hence why there were no objections from the tree officer in terms of removal. And it's actually only one tree that we're proposing to remove anyway. Tree protection plan, I believe, is a condition which we will obviously be doing, which will be discharged, which is where we will then look at how we're actually going to construct this garage in terms of foundations and bits like that to actually protect the hedges and the trees. So I'd ask you to approve this application in line with your officers' reports. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming along. Can we just stay on that photo for a minute, please? Okay. The height of that van. Okay. How's that in comparison with the height of the building you're proposing?
Thank you very much for the question. So in terms of the actual height of that van, I mean, the eaves on the garage that you can see to the side, they're comparable with the eaves on the proposed garage. They're approximately, I'd say they're about 2.4 metres, which is typical how we draw garage doors, from ground. So 2.4 up to the 4.5, it's comparable with the ridge height on the existing garage there that you see. But the proof's in the pudding in terms of the perspective angle, jumping in on the back of this. The height of the hedge that you can see there, how much of the house behind can you actually see? You effectively can't see any of the first floor. You can just see the first floor window. So it just shows. All right.
Councillor Ganesh.
My concern is around the height as well, because you mentioned the hedge is around 3 metre. And what you're proposing is 4.5 metre. That's about time and a half of this hedge. As considerably, the concern raised is should be noted or should be considered when you propose something time and a half of that hedge. Isn't that something, that height is something that, do you really have to stick with that?
I mean, in terms of the actual design and the process that we go through, obviously we work closely as agents and designers. I work closely with the officers. The previous scheme, did have a much higher ridge, and we've gone through that process with different applications and working with the officers to get it down to an acceptable position for the officer. I take on board obviously what you're saying, and when we come to actual construction side of things, certain tiles have minimum pitches, so we're sometimes governed by what we can do with pitches on roofs and things like that. The council's policy says that you don't like flat roofs, so we try to avoid flat roofs. So sometimes we'll do like fake pitches on the front to bring the ridge heights down to obviously less impact. The other part to it is obviously with the hedge itself, and I'm sort of looking towards Mike here, but I don't believe that there's any planning policy that says that hedge isn't allowed to grow to 30 foot tall if the owner wants it to. There is nothing that controls that. And I know obviously we talk about using landscape items as screening and things like that, and I know obviously at certain times of the year it's less prominent, I suppose, in terms of the screening that it provides, but it is still there. And I take on board obviously what you're saying, that it's 3 metres or so in its overall height, but that hedge could be allowed to grow to, like I say, 4, 5, 6 metres high, and it could grow to that. The type of hedge that it is. Not I'm saying that that's something that was going to be done, but and if the officers felt that the ridge height did need to come down a little bit more, then obviously that's something I could look at with my applicant. But to quote officers, it's all applications are assessed on their own merits, and it's the application that's before us right now that you're debating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Frost, followed by Councillor Mahaffey.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate this is my last question on this this particular application. I just want to clarify. Okay, we have the garage on the left hand side. Okay, where the van is. Okay, the garages are. Or it looks like a garage just in front of it. So you're saying that the actual hipped roof starts at about that sort of level, is that correct? And then the ridge line, is that going to be level with the ridge line of those garages, for want of a better word, on the left hand side?
So I can only go by looking at the actual photograph, because obviously in terms of an application, I've got no need to measure and scale the existing house. So I don't know quite where that ridge height sits, but I would say it's got to be it's not quite as high as that, I wouldn't have thought. But what you've got to remember is that also goes to a half-hipped gable end there. So the impact on the neighbouring garden, there you go, slightly better there. Obviously, that's got a higher brick wall. The proposal actually slopes away from the boundary line, which is, again, is something that we've worked with the officers to lessen that impact by pitching the roof away from the boundary line.
Thank you. The point I was trying to get at was how subservient is this garage block? Because let's face it, double garage. Okay, going to be to the house, and in particular what we currently see, where the van is.
Well, again, I'm looking at the photograph there in terms of the overall height of where we're at. I mean, I would say you're comparable to the pitch that is there. Looking at the overall heights of how the windows work, and knowing, if I was designing that house, where I would be at for the heights of the windows and the positions like that. So that's all I can kind of say on that matter.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Mahaffey.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick point of clarification. One of the objections is to the proposed roof lights overlooking number 3. But on the plan, I don't see any, or on the diagrams, I don't see any roof lights. Is that something that's vanished during the amendments? It is. Thank you.
Yes. So during the process, obviously, the first application, I mean, I'll put my hands up and say, yeah, the first application did look to have effectively a room that was upstairs, purely and simply. In today's market, the cost of materials for building extensions and building houses and things like that is skyrocketing for COVID reasons, whatever that means. But making economical sense. When you build a building, you obviously you try to put future-proofed things into this, and that's one of the things that I looked at doing, just purely and simply home office, because obviously we've all been working from home a lot more and things like that. Obviously the officers didn't like that, and we took on board obviously what was said, and also obviously the objections, and that element was changed. The ridge height was brought down, and obviously the roof lights were removed from the scheme.
Thank you.
I see no hands up for questions. Thank you very much. If you could just wipe the table down and the chair and the microphone button for the next speaker, which is Councillor Tristan Robinson. You have 4 minutes, and I will warn you when you have 1 minute left.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members, for your time this evening. I'm speaking on behalf of many residents of Cranesfield in objecting to this application. The proposal is large, overbearing, and excessive for its context. It is for a building 4.5 metres in height, immediately at the bottom of neighbouring gardens. Paragraph 11.44 of our Design and Sustainability SPD highlights that the impact of double garages can be visually dominant and unsympathetic in the street scene. This would be the only house on the whole of the Cranesfield estate which would have a garage in front of the existing building line, which would be dominant in the street scene. The garage is 48, or the proposed garage is 48 square metres in floor space, around 50% of the footprint of the ground floor of the house itself, and will occupy the majority of the front garden and therefore constitute overdevelopment of the site. The application also has an impact on the adjacent hedgerow, a protected hedgerow of over 100 years in age, which predates the construction of Cranesfield estate itself and was protected in the original planning application in 1985-86. The properties to the north and east of the site would also suffer from overlooking, overshadowing, loss of light and loss of visual amenity. The proposal would block sunlight from the south and the west during the evening and have a considerable impact on neighbouring residents. The application should be rejected. The 4.5 metre height and 2.7 metre eave height adjacent to the boundary is excessive. Indeed, the report says the proposal is slightly undesirable and correctly identifies that the estate is characterised by larger front garden areas and it would lead to a cramped site. The proposals contravene policy EM10, high quality development area, areas 1C. It does not positively contribute to the appearance and use of streets and other public spaces. EM10 1D. It does not promote the efficient use of land and appropriate density which responds to the local context. It contravenes EM10 2A. It does not positively contribute to the local distinctiveness, the sense of place in accounts with the Design and Sustainability SPD. It does not tally with EM10 2B. It does not provide a high quality of amenity for neighbouring properties, having regard to overlooking, access to natural light, outlook and amenity space, again in consideration of the Design and Sustainability SPD, and also EM10 2C. It does not have regard to the density, scale, layout, appearance of surrounding buildings and indeed heritage assets, listed again under EM11B. The nearby residents and I are not disputing that the applicant has worked with officers. However, we would question if they have worked far enough. We have heard that there is no roof room in the revised plans. And if there is no roof room, why does this building need to be 4.5 metres in height? That is a significantly high ridge. It does not need to be that height. I would suggest that local residents might be far more amenable if this application were refused and the officers went away and worked with the applicant, or the applicant went away and came back to officers with a far more reasonable proposal which was in keeping with the local area. Thank you.
Questions? I see no hands up. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Councillor Tristan. Yes, the microphone button's the big silver one. Okay, I'm being a bit facetious here, but what would be acceptable to residents?
I think that would be a matter for the residents themselves. However, I would suggest that a building which did not provide such an impact on that amenity space of the front garden of that building and constitute overdevelopment of the site, a building which did not have a ridge height of 4.5 metres, at least 1.5, 2 metres above the existing hedgerow height may be more acceptable.
Councillor Gaskell. Sorry, it was Councillor Frost again.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm a bit confused. Okay, the applicant said that the hedge, which is protected, okay, is 3 metres. Okay, so I'm struggling to understand how you were prevaricating on the actual height of that hedge, and I'm a bit surprised that you've come to the committee saying that this is overbearing and this is against residents' wishes, but you haven't. You're not prepared to actually say what residents would accept. Okay, and I'd like your comments on that, please.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. There are 2 hedges in question. There is the hedge to the immediate east of the site, which is of around 3 metres, which is a protected hedge which has been there for over 100 years. There is also a separate hedge to the north of the site, which is contained of a number of scrubland, which you can see clearly in the photo with the van behind, which is of a slightly lesser height. Indeed, you can see it in that photo in the right corner behind the silver birch tree on the right hand side of that image, below the chimney to the property on the right. In terms of what would be acceptable to local residents, as members of this committee know, every planning application is to be considered on its own merits. It is not appropriate, I would suggest, for the applicant, for members of the public and for myself as the ward councillor to suggest what might be acceptable hypothetically in the future. The question before members tonight is this application acceptable? And to that I would suggest that the answer is no. Thank you.
Councillor Frost, you had 2 questions already.
I appreciate that, Chair. This is my final one, honest.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Frost, I'm being advised by legal you cannot invite the speaker to tell you what he would like to see there. We are asking questions directly about what is before us, not what may be put before us at another time.
I understand that, Chair, and this question is completely different. Okay. In the report that's before us, okay, the officer says that there is no overlooking. Okay, how do you square that?
As the applicant outlined, the roof lights are no longer part of this proposal. So in that sense, there is no overlooking, because you cannot look out of a solid brick roof onto a garden because the solid tiled roof is in the way. However, there is overshadowing, there is loss of light, there is loss of residential amenity as a result. The garage is located to the south and west of residential amenity areas, and that will block evening sun and have a considerable impact on the gardens of neighbouring residents in contravention of policy EM10. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I see no more hands up, so thank you very much. I have no questions. Questions to officers? Councillor Frost, followed by Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you. We've heard a representation from Councillor Tristan Robinson about overlooking, and yet we have officers stating within the report that there is no overlooking. Could you comment on that, please?
The relevant section is on page 165 of the report, where the officer obviously considers the impact on all adjoining neighbours. Obviously, that you have to take into account, obviously, the design of the proposal, its eaves height, its ridge height, the height of the boundary treatment, and then the distance of the adjoining properties. So, given that the closest residential property to be impacted would be obviously those to the north, at number 11, so that is addressed on page 166. I think it would be difficult, given obviously the roof lights have now been amended, and you've got a smaller, lower ridge height roof, and the positioning of it away from the rear wall of the dwelling, and given the height of the existing boundary treatment, no loss of light or overbearing impact or loss of privacy could be substantiated as a reason for refusal.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, that pretty well is my question, except did we have any shadowing diagrams provided to actually substantiate that comment?
No, we do not know.
Okay, I see no hands up. I've got one question. If somebody wished to put a dormer in this roof at a later date, would that be subject to planning permission, or would that be subject to permitted development rights?
Excuse me, Chair. In the interest of helping officers, obviously with their they're coming to announce themselves, there is condition 4, which is suggested, which officers may like to have a look at.
There is condition 4, but obviously we could condition that there be no future insertions in the roof, if that would assist.
Thank you. So I missed that. So if a dormer were to be required at a later date, they would have to go through a separate planning process. Okay, fine. Thank you. Any more questions to officers? Councillor Gaskell.
On page 161, there's a tree officer comment that a condition is required for the protection of the hedge to be recommended. Did they put in any stipulation on what conditions are required to protect the hedge? Because I can see that it's going to be overshadowed and starved of sunlight. I'm not an expert on that, but is there anything which would damage the hedge in any way by having this carriage there?
The obviously condition 5 on page 171 refers to the submission of details to submit the tree and hedgerow protection plan, which obviously that's what the tree officer is referring to. So obviously he's considered the location of the garage and the proximity to the hedge, and feels that it's not of an issue, and then it can be mitigated with that detail being submitted.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Condition 3 talks about materials matching the existing house. The tiles on the existing house, do you know what they are? Are they plain concrete tiles? It's hard to see. Or are they these pan tile type tiles? Do you have any details of that?
Councillor, we don't have details specifically of what that is, but the way that condition would work would be in relation to the external surfaces and the colour and texture, as opposed to specifically whether it's exactly the same tile. So it's looking for that same colour and texture, as opposed to necessarily being clay or concrete.
Right. Just to clarify my question, then, if it was a plain tile as opposed to a wavy tile, they fit at different angles, and therefore, if this is, by the looks of it, a plain tile, whether it's clay or concrete, I'm not too concerned. then that would be the reason we have the ridge height that we have. Is the reason. If it was a different tile, whether there would be room for adjustment. But okay, thank you.
I'm looking at the electronic version of this, not the paper version, and condition 4 on my screen doesn't say anything about insertions in the roof. It says the garage hereby shall be approved, shall not be occupied at any other time for purposes other than incidental for the use of number 4 Cranesfield, should not be sold off, sublet, separate unit or accommodation in connection with any trade, business, profession or commercial enterprise. There is nothing on there that says about insertions and roof. Is my version different from the paper version?
No, Chair, just to clarify, so condition 4 on the agenda paper is to deal with the use of the building thereafter. I think there was some confusion in the sort of to and fro of questions. The point around insertions of roofs could be controlled, insertions in the roof could be controlled by a further condition, which would effectively mean that any future insertions, whether it be roof lights, doors or otherwise, would require planning permission by virtue of permitted development rights being removed. So effectively the answer was that there could be an additional condition to remove that.
Thank you, because I was under the impression it was already included in. Wonderful. Okay, thank you. Debate. I see no hands up. So, if this 90% of this seems to come down to the height of the building and its effect on the neighbours, and if this had a gable wall against the neighbour's boundary at the full height of 4.5 metres, I think it would be overdeveloped, it would be overshadowing. But because of the hipped roof, it is unlikely to cause a vast amount of overshadowing. And on that basis, I don't think, personally, there is enough reason to refuse it. We'll see where we go from there. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with all your comments there. Okay. I think this is a toughie. Okay. But I'm struggling to see where there is any loss of light. Okay. With the hipped roof, and I have to agree with the officer's comments. So in that mind, I am minded to propose a motion to approve this planning permission, subject to the changes that we have, 1 to 5. But I also want the additional condition in there saying that there is no dormer roofs or holes in the roofs letting in sunlight, etc. Okay, and I'll kind of leave it there. Thank you.
And Councillor Ross, thank you. And can I just check that is nothing in the rear elevation, as opposed in relation to those additional openings?
That is correct. Absolutely nothing at all in the whole of the roof.
Councillor Tomlin.
Happy to second.
Thank you. Any other speakers? In that case, it's been moved and seconded for approval with the additional condition that no alteration shall be or opening shall be made to the roof without separate planning permission. Those in favour? I'll make it 8. Six. Okay. And those against? That is approved. Officer.
The application is approved, subject to the additional condition about the removal of future openings.
Thank you. That is the end of the planning applications. There is one more thing on the agenda, which is the nitrate mitigation report, which Mike will give us.
Thank you, Chair. This report starts at page 175 of the agenda. Effectively, it's a situation whereby development proposed in the administrative area Test Valley for 16 dwellings is proposed with some mitigation for dealing with the nitrates issue. In this context, the plan on the screen, which is probably better than on the agenda pack, shows the application site as the very small red dot to the bottom left. So that's on the Test Valley borough boundary. And the mitigation land for nitrate offsetting, which in this instance would be taking agricultural land and retiring agricultural land, and putting it into woodland management, similar to the schemes that have come before you for mitigation within this borough. It just so happens that that mitigation land is within our borough, so it is demonstrated within the area shown in the blue. The reason for the report going forward is effectively to seek committee's approval that in this instance that mitigation can be secured by 106, where the council would enter into that 106, but would effectively delegate enforcement function to Test Valley Borough Council for nitrate mitigation only in relation to land within Basingstoke's administrative area. The section 106 being drawn up would include step-in rights to enable us to effectively withdraw that in the event that there would be any concerns raised about enforcement or monitoring. All of the determination of the application, the appropriate assessment that goes along with whether it's an appropriate nitrate mitigation, stays with the determining authority as Test Valley. The only reason this report is before you effectively is to secure or seek to secure the approval of that delegation of enforcement function in relation to that one element of the section 106 to Test Valley. And therefore seeking approval of the recommendation set out on page 175.
Does anybody want to comment? My thoughts on it are that we gain some woodland which somebody else looks after for us, so it's a win-win. Councillor Court.
Thank you, Joe. Just looking at the word competent, what does it actually mean in regards to Test Valley?
Competent authority is meaning in terms of the regulations in relation to undertaking appropriate assessment to demonstrate that the impacts on certain environmental status is acceptable. So that's the terminology used is competent authority in that regard.
Supplementing on that one, they have the expertise to be competent in this area. Thank you.
Yes, as the local planning authority in that regard, they would be, yeah.
So is everybody happy that we accept that? Agreed? Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Meeting closed at 9, I make it 9:38. Thank you. And thank you very much to all the officers for all their hard work.